sometimes. We can all be deceived as Christians, but that passage is referring to a specific time, specific place, dealing with your salvation versus the Antichrist. Now, when you consider that passage, if it were possible, that's how deceptive the Antichrist is going to be. He's going to be so deceptive that if it were possible, the elect would be deceived. Now, that's dealing with their salvation. At that time, the true elect of God who are filled with the Holy Spirit will not be deceived by him to the degree of their salvation. Now, they might be deceived by the Antichrist politically, following after whatever it is he's pushing and selling, but there will come a time where their salvation is on the line, and no, they will not be deceived according to Scripture.
So do you see this as the end times event? Aliens coming down, declaring to be saviors of humanity, saying there's a cataclysm coming and we can save you, but you have to take the mark of the beast or something like that?
I believe the aliens in the last days, which we don't really believe them to be space aliens, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes, but I believe that the alien entities, the higher entities, they will likely use some type of a cataclysmic event, something major, whether it's real or synthetic. We know about Project Bluebeam. Mm-hmm. We know about technology where they can project an image in the sky. They could simulate a false rapture, and the news could be used. My team that I work with, Wes Fall, Chad Riley, Fourth Watch Films, Fall Brothers Productions, we don't believe in a pre-trib rapture. And I want to lay this out there very clearly. The deception surrounding a pre-trib rapture, I believe, will be used in this alien deception. They can synthesize a fake rapture. The news could promote it. Nobody could disprove it because all the channels of media are going to be promoting this idea, and they're going to have crisis actors, they're going to have footage, they're going to have possibly CG being mixed in with real video. We don't know how that's going to go down, but there could be a fake rapture event where they stage it so that people who are not firmly rooted in Christ, maybe people who have heard the gospel, they've received the gospel, they think they're saved, but they're not really saved. There's no fruit in their life, there's no root that's taking place. Those people will fall away thinking that they've missed the rapture.
That's scary stuff, man. Is that maybe what Jesus was talking about when he said, many will come to me on that day saying, Lord, Lord, and I'll say, back away from me, I never knew you?
No, Jesus said that there's coming a time where they're going to say to him, Lord, Lord, I did all this good stuff in your name. The thing that gets my attention there is that he mentioned some specifics, like casting out demons in your name. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a major denomination right now that they make their big deal on casting out demons. There's a couple of them, actually. There's going to be people that think they're operating in spiritual gifts, yet Jesus is going to say, I never knew you. Yeah. But what we're talking about with this alien idea, the aliens are going to be giving different types of experiences to people. This is what people have to understand. The experiences have to be tested with Scripture. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, we're going to accept them because they're supernatural experiences, whether it's a supernatural healing, whether it's some type of a prophetic event where they speak a word of knowledge or they know something about your history, whatever it may be. The aliens could have a cure for cancer. The aliens. These higher entities are coming from a different place than us. They're not earthborn. The only ones that could be earthborn would be the demons, which came through the line of the Nephilim. And obviously, that's a little bit of a different scenario. Mm-hmm. It ties in together. But with higher entities, we're dealing with, there is a group that we track in this film called the Collins Elite.
Okay.
And the idea was trying to answer the question, were there events in history where the American government was working with entities? That was kind of the beginning of this research. And if so, what happened? Can we validate this? What came of that? But also, were there factions in the government who stood up against these things? That was the premise of this film. And we started off by talking about a group known as the Collins Elite.
Okay.
Now, let's just go back in time. There was an event that took place back in the late 40s known as the Babylon Working Ritual. Now, this was a ritual that was carried out by Jack Parsons, JPL. People will even to this day say that JPL stands for Jack Parsons Laboratories, but on paper it's Jet Propulsion Laboratories. JPL is major. It's a historic, so much surrounding this, so much history here. Jack Parsons was not professionally trained, yet he was tapping into high technology and building rockets. How do you do that without any type of formal training? There were no rocket programs in America before Jack Parsons. This is paramount to understand. This guy was tapping into theosophy, Thelema, the religion of Aleister Crowley. He was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and he was working with L. Ron Hubbard, who was the founder of Scientology. Interestingly, not only did L. Ron Hubbard start Scientology, but he was a science fiction writer. The movie Battlefield Earth with John Travolta, well, that was written by L. Ron Hubbard. Interestingly also, John Travolta is a Scientologist, right? Now, I mention this because this is a man who writes science fiction, yet he started a religion based on science fiction. There has to be something in there where he's getting these clues and these ideas. He's getting these from another realm.
So do you believe that the Babylon working ritual made contact with the other side, and then the people involved with the ritual received special knowledge that would go on to create rocketry and stuff like that, high technology that they would never have without?
Absolutely. Babylon working was successful according to Jack Parsons. Matter of fact, Parsons said in his Antichrist Manifesto that they were successful, and that a child was conceived in that act, and that there was a spirit known as Hilarion. The Whore of Babylon was what they were trying to bring about. They believed what we believe, in that America was the final Babylon. Like, this was the revived Babylon. They believed it, and they were occultists. We're Christians, and we believe it. There's evidence to back this up. But yes, let's backtrack just for a second. What happened was they opened up this portal, they created a rift, and entities began to come through. Not just this Whore of Babylon being birthed, but other entities, because people all over the place started having paranormal encounters, and they began to report this to law enforcement, report this to the FBI, report this to whatever agency they could get in touch with. And so the federal agencies said, we've got to come up with an answer for this. We were not prepared for any of this. There's UFO activity. There's talk of entities and demons and winged creatures and just all kinds of weird, just paranormal, demonic activity following this ritual that Jack Parsons said finally worked. They did the ritual for a couple years. It finally worked, finally stuck. And that's what a scientist does. A scientist is going to work at something. He's going to work at that hypothesis until it's proven true or false. Now, finally, the researchers, the government puts together this group that says we're going to get answers to what exactly took place out there in the desert in California by Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. They go to Jack Parsons. And keep in mind, Jack Parsons is also working with the government. He's now been given, special privileges on things. So they go to him and they say, Jack, all of this stuff that's happening right now, did you do this? Did you do this? And he said, I think so. Now, shortly thereafter, Jack Parsons blows himself up in a lab. Accidental. It was not intentional. The occult belief was that whoever opened up the portal had to close the portal. Well, Jack Parsons is now dead. And the federal government is now having to understand and depict exactly to the public what's happening here. And so this group is researching, and out of that group, they finally start to make some headway. They know they're dealing with entities. And so in all of that, they begin to try to make contact with those entities, maybe for some help, maybe because they're trying to figure out how to close this thing, maybe they're trying to figure out how to undo what Jack Parsons did. So they go through satanic rituals to communicate, because that's the only method of communication that they know that works to contact these entities. In doing this, there's a small faction known as the Collins Elite. This is where our film picks up. The Collins Elite was a small group inside of this larger group that was originally created to get answers to all of this. But once they began to engage in satanic rituals and magic and alchemy, this group says, hey, you know what? This is not what we signed up for. This small group raises up. It's a faction. It's a counterpoint group, which means that they are no longer in agreement with the big group. They have a different opinion. They say, we have a Christian worldview. This goes against our Christian worldview. And so they see that entities are being channeled and communicated with, and now technology is being given through these rituals to these other members of the government. So the Collins Elite says, whoa, this is dangerous. You guys are really playing with fire here. We can't support this. We can't do this. And they came up with this idea that the aliens were going to take over, and that in order to protect our country from the aliens, from the entities, they believed that we needed to instate a forced theocracy based on the law of Moses.
Wow.
Because they thought if our country would go back under the law of Moses, that we would be untouchable from these entities.
Do they have any reasons to believe so? Have you uncovered anything that shows that they brought up the name of Jesus or anything like that?
We've got nothing about that.
Okay.
Matter of fact, let me just give a little more detail here. This group, this bigger group that was researching to get answers, they did not exist. Okay, this was what's known as a limited access program, or an LAP. A limited access program means that nobody in Congress has to know about this. You've got literally just the group, and maybe a director knows about it. Nobody else. It's completely classified. It's top secret. It's under lock and key. But I want to mention something. One of the bombshells that we dropped was that there's a declassified federal document. Anyone watching this interview can go find this document. It's on the FBI vault.
What's the name of it?
6751. Document 6751, it's a document from the 40s. It was written by a prominent member of academia, and it was submitted to the FBI. In this document, they make a case that entities are not space aliens, but that they're interdimensional or extra-dimensional entities that are crossing over from a plane known as the ethereal plane.
Wow.
Now, we know, as researchers of the New Age movement, we know that that is where the ascended masters are supposedly said to be on a high level. This ethereal plane is very popular. When you talk to people who astral project, people who channel, people who remote view, people who want to tap in or go on a trip, an ayahuasca trip, a DMT trip, this is where they claim to go. Now, the federal government had this document in the 40s, and language was used in this document that came right out of the playbook of theosophy. Now, the guy that received this document, this is so crazy. The federal agent receives the document, and look, the FBI is constantly bombarded with phone calls and letters and emails. They just can't deal with all of the propaganda from citizens. People make stuff up, and it's just it's nothing. It's crying wolf. So the FBI has to really be careful what they accept and what they don't. But this was back in the 40s.
Man.
A little different back then than it is today.
Absolutely.
So the guy that receives the document, he recognizes that this information was received through paranormal means. As a matter of fact, the language used in the 40s was supernormal. That's the old way of saying paranormal, supernormal. So he says that all of this information was received through supernormal means, therefore we need to discount it. It's not valid information. Now, that's the headline that he put. It's like a cover letter. If he really believed that, why did they classify the document? Why did they classify it and then forward it to all of these FBI prominent members at the highest level of security clearance? Why in the world would they classify it and lock it up if they didn't believe it? It wasn't until years later that they declassified document 6751. And I read this document and I'm thinking, okay, since the 40s, the federal government at the highest levels have known that these are not space aliens, that these are entities coming from another dimension. Since the 40s. Yet they promoted an alien agenda.
That's unbelievable. So, in your opinion, do you believe that these entities that they made contact with are the ones that are in document 6571? Are they fallen angels? Or specifically, biblically, how can we equate that to our worldview?
6751 does not give specific classifications of entities per se. For instance, when you talk to someone who has worked in a deep underground military base, which we have, we've interviewed people, they talk about different classes of entities. None of that is really mentioned in 6751. It's more so an overall summarization of what's going on. Now, there were some information about traveling through the dimensions. There's some very fascinating tidbits in this document. And we don't really go too deep into the document other than referencing it in the film, because we had to go through, we've got over 300 declassified documents in our collection right now, all pertaining to aliens, UFOs, extrasensory perception, psychic activity that they're training people to operate in. The federal government has been training people in the occult since the 40s. Training them in how to operate in occult magic and occult sciences. Everything our Bible tells us is absolutely forbidden. Our federal government has been a part of this since the 40s. And I want to add, back in the 40s, they still promoted the idea of a Christian nation of America. Yet behind the scenes, it just goes to show that the people in charge of our government have been pacifying the society since the beginning. And I don't understand how people could be so, so blinded. We present the information. This is what they said in the 40s, and it's only gotten worse over the years. Now, let me just draw us into this other area real fast. This group, the Collins Elite, they really wanted to create, how can I put this? They wanted to create some type of resistance. Non-aggressive, of course. Non-aggressive resistance. That's what I see. I understand that from my studies. That's what I believe. They wanted a non-aggressive resistance to what was taking place because they saw that when a man or a group of men began to communicate with these entities, the hunger for power gets greater and greater and greater, and then you're no longer trying to get answers. You're now wanting to ask them to give you blessings. You're now getting technology and information from these entities, and you're utilizing it in the way that you structure your government moving forward.
Wow.
That's what's scary about governments working with entities.
So do you believe that there was a power exchange? And do you believe that they're still working today with these entities?
Oh, there was a power exchange. There was trading power for technology, absolutely. And you would say, well, why would these entities need the government? It's not a matter of them needing the government. It's a matter of setting up the scene for the end times deception where the Antichrist is going to unite the governments of the world. It's all part of their long game. They've been working on this since the beginning of time. It didn't work at the Tower of Babel. The Lord ended it quickly. But here we are today. Where are we today, and what happened between then and now? Well, what we find out is that one of our contacts, Stan Deyo, who, by the way, Tom Horn gave us a great endorsement of Stan Deyo. Tom Horn, before his house burned down years ago, he had this big newspaper article from the UK. And standing on the cover with these other elite doctors and scientists, it's Stan Deyo, and they're giving him credit in the UK, public knowledge that he's working on anti-gravity craft.
Wow.
Now, the film that we did called The Hollow Earth Chronicles, we did a whole segment in that film on Operation High Jump. This was a joint task force between the American government, the British government, and the Australian government, headed by the U.S. and Admiral Byrd. They go down to Antarctica and what turns into a UFO battle. And their big plan got cut in half, and they had to come home early because we lost men, we lost ships. There's stories of UFOs coming up out of the water and just cutting ships in half with laser. I mean, just crazy stuff that you only see in movies. What's fascinating about this is that this was a joint task force with those same three governments that are now working together with Stan Deyo, the British, the American, and the Australians working together on alien technology yet again, years after Operation High Jump happened.
Wow.
But
what were you going to say?
Stan Deyo was working as a secret agent for the FBI in Australia inside of the deep underground military bases. And he said while he was in the program, he knew about the deal with Eisenhower. He knew in the program that President Eisenhower had made a deal with what they called alien entities.
So that's actually been a rumor now for a while, and you believe that is actually the case, that Eisenhower met with alien entities and made some sort of arrangement with them?
I believe that the evidence points to two events taking place, and these two events happened 1 year apart. The first one happened at Edwards Air Force Base, where Eisenhower disappears, and they call it a media blackout. It was kind of similar to when Hillary Clinton and President Obama disappeared and were at the Bilderberg meeting, but nobody knew where they were, and it was called a media blackout. People freaked out, right? Well, something similar happened here, where Eisenhower is no longer on radar, and they come back later and say, oh, well, he had a dental emergency, and so he had to go seek private dental care. Now, that happened, and then a year later, we have the Holloman Air Force Base event. Now, the thing about the Holloman event was that people were there who witnessed it. Holloman is where they were out on the landing strip, and you had UFOs landing, meeting with him. Meeting took place with Eisenhower and others, and then those UFOs took off. Now, there were eyewitnesses who have come forward. I was just talking about this with Chad Riley because he found some videotapes from the 90s. This is before the internet was doing its thing. In the 90s, there were videos that were recorded, old VHS tapes of some of these disclosure-type engagements. I don't know what you want to call it, but these are men that were there. They're decorated men from the government, and they're now speaking out that, yes, UFOs were landing and taking off at Holloman Air Force Base, and I believe it was 1955.
Wow.
I don't have the month right now.
So 1955, and then the Babylon Working was what year?
Late 40s.
Okay. So
Now that happened.
Correlation in two events.
Well, we do know that things began to be more apparent after Babylon Working, and therefore there were more things taking place where there was people seeking the entity. So what I believe happened was that the rift was open, the tear in the space-time continuum, if you will, a portal, Stargate was opened, and the government got involved, the feds got involved. Once they began to communicate with the entities, there was now a relationship being built, and it was no longer shock value that there are these entities who want to work with us. So I think that was definitely an open door, no pun intended, for those entities to now be communicating with President Eisenhower years later, not too many years later, but a few years later. They're now meeting with Eisenhower, and so the story goes like this. We're on the road trip, we're driving out to meet with Ray Boucher, who was contacted by the Department of Defense. This is really important. This is one of those like haymakers. The information that he gives us that he presented his full disclosure in our film Higher Entities. But we're driving there and we're having a discussion, and we decided let's just go ahead and let's run some cameras, while we're driving and talking. So we set up our production stuff in Darren's SUV. We're driving down the road, and we had this conversation about this Eisenhower deal. See, what I had heard and researched was a little different than what Darren had picked up in his research. And this is one of those scenes in the movie where it's just like, wow, like the stuff that came out was so organic and unbelievable. Apparently, there were two events that happened, and a lot of people blur them. A lot of people will mix it up with the Edwards Air Force Base and the Holloman. They're two separate events a year apart. That's so important. But the idea is that the gray aliens, on record, met with Eisenhower. And then you had this other group of entities known as like the Tall Whites or the Nordics. They met with Eisenhower separately, and they warned him. They said, you do not ever want to make a deal with the gray aliens. They are deceptive. They are very deceptive. All they want to do is deceive you and enslave you.
Wow.
They're demonic, basically. I don't think they use the word demonic, right? Because they're all demonic. But they were warning Eisenhower never to enter into a covenant with the Greys. Well, they were the good guys, the Greys were the bad guys. This is fascinating because if you fast forward into this idea of a coming deception, they had to already set the groundwork to create a good alien, bad alien, wow. Good cop, bad cop.
And that actually kind of fits along with the New Age belief of the Galactic Federation of Light.
Right.
The light workers. And they kind of all believe that there are these higher entities that want the best for humanity, and they are our saviors. But they call themselves the Galactic Federation of Light, or something like that. And they're like...
That's the term, by the way. That is the term.
Okay. And did they... do you believe that that was a group that made contact with Eisenhower?
It's tough to say, because what we're dealing with here is a bunch of liars.
Okay.
Satan's a liar. His demons are liars. That's why when someone starts playing with a Ouija board,
mm-hmm.
their grandmother starts talking to them. Well, it's not your grandmother, bro. Yeah. That's a demon.
Yeah.
That's an entity who wants to deceive you. Sure. They want to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That's biblical. And we're also told as Christians, we got to be vigilant, and we got to be sober-minded because Satan is our adversary. And the word Satan, the name Satan isn't really a name. We have this misconception that Satan, the devil, the red pitchfork, and in reality, Ha-Satan is the enemy, the adversary. And so when we say Satan, it could actually be referring to the whole team of demons and entities, fallen angels. And so what we have is we have the fallen angels, and now it's my personal belief. Let me just lay this out real quick. It's my personal belief, based on the book of Revelation and based on me using a calculator and understanding some definitions, I was able to calculate that if a third of the angels fell with Lucifer, with Satan, the Satan, right? If a third of them fell with him, and that's also based on another passage of a third of the stars getting knocked down to earth. If that passage means what we think it means, and if we understand it correctly, a third of the angels fell with Satan. And you can do your math and figure out that equals somewhere between 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the surface of the earth. Now, out of that, some of them were put in chains. The Bible tells us this because the ones that committed sexual sin, the Genesis 6, they have been locked up in chains. We can read about this in Jude. But the ones that are not locked in chains, Just think about it, 30 to 50 plus million fallen angels on the face of the earth. Like that's, I made the comment recently in an interview I did that is more than the population of the largest state in America. So
wow, so we are dealing with a large group of entities who have the capabilities not only to deceive mankind, but to kind of guide them in the direction that they want to go. I mean, it seems like, from everything you just said, it seems like that they are setting up for the final great deception. So let's track back to the Collins Elite a little bit. So what happened to them? Did they, I mean, they obviously saw something was going wrong, right? So did they disappear? Are they still around, do you think?
but we have to remember that the original group that they were a part of was an LAP, Limited Access Program, and so that means that they don't exist. So what happened was, by the time we got involved in the research, and my research for the Collins Elite only goes back about 3 or 4 years. So like I'm not Mr. I wasn't around back in the 40s, when all this was getting started. But what we did was we wanted to really, in order to validate the Collins Elite's existence, we also needed to find out were there other groups like this through the years. Because if it's going on here, it's probably going on over here and over here, right? You want to be able to confirm with more witnesses than just an eyewitness of one group. So that's part of what we did in the film Higher Entities, was we wanted to show that there are other groups, other people who have had experiences in the government. And by the way, Tom Horn, his brother-in-law, was murdered. He worked at Los Alamos. This was the first time he ever told the story publicly. He never spoke this story publicly. Matter of fact, he told his sister that he would not disclose the full story while she was still alive. Yet here he is. He worked it out to tell us the story in our film. His brother-in-law worked for Los Alamos. And interestingly, he married Tom's sister, who had alien encounters from the time she was about 13 years old, as soon as she started entering into puberty. And there's something about a child entering into puberty that's attractive to the demonic world. I don't understand that 100%. But regardless, not only did she suffer alien visitations and paralysis as a child, her daughter, the next generation, when she entered into that age of puberty, she began to get attacked. And then her husband, this is where it gets crazy, he comes home one day. They start drinking, knocking back a few. One thing leads to another, which I found out a lot of times when people start drinking, they're able to pull things out of the recesses that they would never talk about. So many stories of alien abductions and demonic activity people are willing to talk about after they have a few drinks. Things that are in those deep recesses come out. Now, I'm not saying that to recommend or to I'm just saying that a lot of the stories we find out about in our research comes from one guy having a few drinks, and then it just starts coming out. It's like the filter's gone.
Wow.
Long story short, and we give the full story in Higher Entities. It's a great story. Not great as in good, but it's very fascinating. He comes home, he and the wife start drinking, and she decides she's going to share some of her childhood history with him that he didn't know about. And if I remember correctly how it all went down, he comes out and says, well, this is crazy because we're actually working with this type of stuff at Los Alamos. Now, he gives her information that we don't know, but he disclosed to her what he was doing in the alien base, that the conspiracy theorists call an alien base. But now it doesn't really seem like a conspiracy theory anymore, because if it was just a theory, why would he have been killed 24 hours later? 24 hours after he shares what they were doing at Los Alamos, he disappears, no body found, nothing. They say that they've never seen him back in the offices, So she reaches out and she's like, where's my husband never came home from work. He left for work. He left our house. He drove, he went to Los Alamos, but he never came home. Well, she now wants to get her benefits just to help pay for all the expenses that he was bringing in money. He's no longer there, and he's been working hard. There's pension and guarantees that she's supposed to get. They won't give her anything because there's no body. Without a body, there's no death certificate. Without a death certificate, there's no benefits. So she's working for the federal government as well. She starts rattling the cage high up, and finally, once she starts dropping information that's putting fear in people, they, in order to shut her up, finally say, okay, you know what, here you go, here's your benefits, done. Now, that tells me that it's not a conspiracy theory, that there's actual fact to this, there's alien activity, demonic activity going on at Los Alamos, and it was so serious that they would have had his house bugged, and that they were tracking every discussion he had in that house.
So, Los Alamos is home to America's nuclear program, correct?
I don't know all. I can't speak on that, to be honest with you.
Okay. Have you uncovered any connections between like the first nukes and alien entity contacts?
There is a part of the Hollow film that where we talk about this. We talk about Admiral Byrd, this crazy story of him going down into the Hollow Earth, being taken down by UFOs with swastikas or the Iron Cross. I forget what was on the UFOs, but he gets taken down. He loses all control of his plane. He's taken down inside the Earth, and he gets to meet with this entity known as the Master. Matter of fact, in the Hollow Earth Chronicles film, we do an entire dramatized version of Admiral Byrd's diary. And so whether or not the diary was written by Byrd or it was written by a family member who was, retaining all of those secrets, we don't know. But what we do know is that the Master was warning Admiral Byrd that when he comes back onto the surface that he needed to bring a message to our government, and that message was stop playing with nukes.
Wow. That's really interesting because what you just talked about with Tom Horton's family, him working at Los Alamos and disappearing like that, there have been rumors of deep underground military bases in Los Alamos or around Dulce.
Oh, it is. And that was the thing, was he was working in the DUM, the deep underground military base. From my understanding, he was working there, and he told her what he was working on. We don't even know what that was. That's what's so fascinating about this story, is that we don't even know what he disclosed, but it was something so serious that 24 hours later, he's dead.
Wow. Do you think there's any connection between Roswell event and all of this stuff?
I think the Roswell event definitely was, again, we're dealing with the fallout of what took place at the Babylon Working. Babylon Working changed everything. I believe that was prophetic on the satanic timeline. That was a big deal. And so I do believe, for a fact, that Roswell was just another byproduct. And I also believe, based on another FBI document that we have in our stack of over 300, is that there were more than one craft. And I believe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say there was possibly 9 bodies, according to one declassified document.
Wow.
I don't want to misquote that, but I want to go on record to say that there was something to do with, I think, 3 craft and possibly 9 bodies, according to one document.
So do you think this is where they get the physical technology that they kind of reverse engineer and bring these entities like from Roswell, for instance, down into the deep underground military bases? Or is that just a whole separate event where the Roswell entities were came through here by accident, and the whole thing was just happenstance?
It's actually a really good question. This is going to lead us right into Ray Boucher. Ray Boucher is now bringing all of this current. We're no longer dealing with 1940s or 50s or 60s. We're dealing with, our lifetime, and this is where it just hits home. Ray Boucher is an ordained minister. He has been a Baptist minister, a Lutheran minister, and he's also known as a Lutheran exorcist. We're very particular about who we work with and who we yoke up with in ministry. And after talking with Ray and looking into him, he is extremely biblically sound. His theology is right in line with Scripture on all the majors that would matter. And so we did some homework on this guy. Tom Horn, Derek Gilbert, goodness, everybody that we talked to, people that I'm not even going to name, people that we talked to off the record, everybody kept saying, including Darren Geisinger and Chad Riley, they all said, you've got to talk to Ray Boucher. They said he was met with by 2 members of the Department of Defense because of his unique background as a minister, as an exorcist, and as the head of MUFON for his state, which is Nebraska. This is a guy who was heavily involved in the UFO community back before the internet was a thing. He would go to these meetings, he would read up. I mean, back then it was like a videotape was like $60, like a documentary videotape. You pay $60. I mean, these were the days before the internet, before YouTube. Information was harder to get. But Ray Boucher was heavily involved in the UFO community back in the day. And so being the head of MUFON and also for his state, and also for being a minister and an exorcist and a UFO advocate, a UFO truth advocate, these 2 men contact him from the DOD, and they say, we really need to meet with you because of your unique standing. We need to meet with you, and we need we need you to consult with us about what some of this may be. So he met secretly with these members of the Department of Defense, and they told him that they were part of a non-existent group inside the DoD working on government facilities paid for by taxpayer dollars, and that they began to try to get answers to some of this stuff, and they began to engage in occult rituals to communicate with these entities. Now let me explain this. If you don't feel like this is just a reoccurrence of the Collins elite, I mean, this is recent. This is happening in the modern time period. He says that their bigger group was engaging in what he called satanic rituals, and he even said that the DoD contacts hinted at human sacrifice being done on the taxpayer dollar behind closed doors on government facilities. He said they started off with, we just want to get answers. And he says, and that turned into a we can do better mentality. We can do more than this. We can go above and beyond. This is the same story you see when you're watching movies about famous drug dealers. Oh, we can do better mentality. Starts off, they're just selling a little dope. And before you know it, they're a kingpin, and they just want more and more and more. It's not that they need it anymore, but it's that we can do better mentality. We can't leave well enough alone, to quote Karate Kid. We cannot leave well enough alone, and we can do better, and we're going to do better, and we're going to get more technology, we're going to get more information, we're going to get more power, and we're going to rise up by the power of the entities. And so Ray Boucher explained to them that yes, this stuff was extremely demonic. That yes, y'all had a good idea. Basically, your instincts were correct. This is demonic and you don't need to be doing it. They knew that was the case, but they needed someone they could talk to, such as Ray Boucher with his unique background. And so he was able to meet with them, and I believe they met twice. They had some phone conversations. But the thing is Ray wouldn't meet with us originally. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He's a very friendly guy. He was willing to just be cordial and hello, nice to meet you. But when we told him we wanted him on camera and that we wanted to meet with him, it was like, well, I could probably work with you guys at some point. He says, but I'm really busy. It's kind of like the nice way of saying, sorry, can't help you. We continued to try to reach out to him. We began our investigation. We talked with Tom Horn and Derek Gilbert and these others. Derek Gilbert told us to go listen to an interview he did with a podcast. Dr. Future, I think, was the name of the show. And we listened to it, and at the very beginning of the podcast, the guy says, wow, we've been trying to schedule this with you for over a year, and you're finally coming on to talk with us. So I imagine Ray Boucher is extremely careful. He's very standoffish. He wants to protect his family. He doesn't want to get involved in something he shouldn't be. And so I just kind of wrote it off that he's not going to meet with us. And we're probably going to have to just go ahead and end this project early. He finally comes through and says, okay, I'll do it. But I'm not going to tell you where we're going to meet or what time we're going to meet. He says, plan on coming down and getting a hotel in the big city close by. So we did. We went down. We got a hotel in the big city. And it was a big city, by the way. This city was booming and busy. I mean, crazy busy the whole time we were there. We didn't know until the morning of what time we were going to meet and the fact that he was going to come to us at our hotel room. That's how secretive he is.
Wow.
And just to add a little bit of mystery to this situation, shortly after we got done releasing this film, I get word that Ray Boucher has been diagnosed with some strange, rare kind of cancer.
Wow. Man.
So I say that to ask people to be praying for him.
Absolutely. Well, we know that historically, UFO researchers and whistleblowers always, not always, but a lot of times they'll come up with this rare form of cancer that's fast-acting, dead within weeks. They also have heart attack guns and stuff like that. And typically, this is the fate that these people had because they were trusted with some top secret information and decided that the public interest was more important.
Let me add to that. That's a great point. One of the bonus nuggets that we released in Higher Entities was there was a guy who had very high security clearance. And I believe it was a lieutenant colonel. I forget. Chad Riley knows it was his contact. It wasn't our contact. And by the way, let me just give a quick shout out to Chad Riley. He's the guy who fishes up these documents that nobody's ever heard of. Like, we are blessed to have, people are like, how do you even get some of this information? Well, we've got a guy on our team named Chad Riley, and he has a skill to where he fishes up these rare documents from the FBI vault that nobody's ever heard of. And so it's a blessing to have him on board, and he's also our co-producer. So having Chad on board, because somebody's going to wonder, how did you find document 6751? It was downloaded. You can only download it, like, if you don't know how to find it, you got to download it in a thick packet called the UFO packet number 1, which, by the way, is available on the FBI vault. The same FBI vault where they admitted that Hitler was alive in Argentina after World War II. People ask where we got that document that we showed in the Hollow Earth Chronicles. Oh, we got it from the FBI. While I was doing an interview with Gon Shimura on Face Like the Sun YouTube channel, he goes to pull up the document. His IP address is blocked from accessing that document. He had to go in and change his settings live on the recording that we did. He had to change his browser settings just to access 6751. Now, I don't want to digress. I'm a nugget dropper. I drop nuggets everywhere. Everybody loves these nugs. I do too. But here's the thing. This is so important. We're dealing with this idea of government agencies doing anything it takes to keep you from getting the Easter egg. That's what it is. They're trying to hide their Easter eggs. And so what happened here was Chad's contact, his name is Greg Renrich. He has the above top secret clearance, areas such as Groom Lake, Area 51, a list. Chad breaks down the whole list and higher entities. And so Chad was in contact with him through our other mutual contact, Kay Carswell, who's a dear friend of ours. Kay has become friends with Greg Renrich. They've interviewed him. I don't know if they've interviewed him publicly or just private, but he started to give Chad all this information that we were going to include in our film. And so the information was unbelievable, and I'll give that information away here in a second, but I want to just say he was supposed to be in our film. At some point, he just decides he's going to just fall off the face of the earth and back out. And so we're trying to get answers, like what's going on with Greg Renrich. I mean, he was a prime interview. We needed him. This guy has been down in the underground bases with the entities. Wow. See, Stan Deo didn't work directly with entities. His colleagues worked with the entities. Wow. So Stan's was hearsay, trustworthy hearsay, but he didn't work with the entities. This guy, Greg Renrich, worked in the base with entities that called themselves the Nephilim. They were 9, 10 feet tall entities, and they told him that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and that they were going to win. They believed they were going to win. Furthermore, Greg Renrich is on record saying that he had to sign an affidavit before he could go in this facility, that he wouldn't even use the name Jesus, even as a cuss word, in this deep underground military base. And this goes right back to what Joe Jordan says, is that hundreds of cases of alien abduction completely halted at the name of Jesus being proclaimed.
So you can't even say the name of Jesus in these deep underground military bases.
No, and well, I don't know about all of them, but the one that Greg Renrich, the various bases that Renrich worked in with his clearance, at least one of those bases, he had to sign an affidavit that he would not use the name of Jesus, even if he stubbed his toe as a cuss word, he couldn't say Jesus.
Wow. So what we have here is they have their army. And we, as Christians, we know how this all ends, right? We know Jesus is going to come back, and we know that he's going to throw all these demonic entities into the bottomless pit. They're not going to win. But
no.
Why do they think they can win? Have you come up with any ideas to what makes them think this way? Because we know that the gospel of the Bible is 100% truth, and it's incorruptible. It's kind of a
loaded answer, because obviously I don't know the mind of a demon 100%, but it's kind of similar. It's kind of similar to what the Freemasons believe. When you work your way up into Freemasonry, you believe that it's compatible with your faith. And in reality, it's really not compatible with anyone's faith. It's its own faith. But you don't know that at the lower levels. You know, it's a universalist group. You know, when you take that first initiation, you are agreeing that all paths lead to the great architect, what they call God, the eye of providence. As you work your way up, I think it's the 28th degree, somewhere between the 28th and the 30th, if I remember correctly. I just had this conversation the other night with my buddy Brett, and you have this understanding that the Bible is good and it's the Word of God, but when you get to the 28th to the 30th degree, you find out that the role gets reversed, and that Lucifer was actually the underdog. He was the good God that really did all the good creation, that really did. He had the best, he had basically our best interest at heart in everything he did.
Gnosticism.
It's Gnosticism. And so Jesus, they believe, is the enemy. Yahweh is the enemy, that it's a reversal role, that the Bible, and this is part of the coded language that they use, is that you don't find this out until you're higher up. So it's like the reversing of roles. So even though Jesus has already died on the cross, he shed his blood on Calvary, and there's some really interesting things about his blood possibly going down to the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe another video we could talk about that. But Jesus died on Calvary. He descended into the heart of the earth, where he preached to the spirits in prison. This is all part of the Hollow Earth film we did. And then he rose. He defeated death. He rose from the dead. And he declared victory over every unclean spirit, over every imp of Satan, over every evil entity that would ever be in existence. He literally declared victory over. And their time is short. They know their time is short. Yet their goal is to try to do as much damage to the kingdom as they can. But what we know, according to Scripture, is that their work is in vain, because the cross defeated all of that. Now, let me add one last little thing here.
My name is Wes.
That again.
Be good.
Fall, and I am part of Fall Brothers Productions and Fourth Watch Films with Justin Fall and with Chad Riley. And the Lord just directed our steps into kind of a full circle. We both went to film school, Justin and I did, years ago, and we had to pay bills, doing other things, but the Lord brought us back to making films. And so it's been a crazy ride, but I'm just glad to be here and doing what the Lord's called us to do.
Awesome. So we're glad to have you on, and your latest film is called Higher Entities. What kind of got you guys interested in this area, and what made you want to make this film?
The biggest thing that directed us this is that it's a question that's been around for a long time that still remains unanswered. And so we looked at this alien question. You can go back to even the past election in 2016. Hillary was talking about how if she won, she was going to open the vault and get into basically exposing what the UFOs are and the alien question. You also have what's the show? Ancient Aliens. Excuse me. You also have the show Ancient Aliens, and that gives a great explanation as far as the world goes. But we're not of this world. And so we wanted to look at it in the biblical aspect of it and to try to break down, what are we dealing with here? Because the world does have this answer, but as we found out, so does the Bible.
Absolutely. So what are we dealing with? Are they fallen angels? Are they space aliens? Are they physical beings from other planets? Or are they something from a different dimension?
Good question. I'll go back to the quote from Aleister Crowley. We mentioned this in the film. But he says that today we're calling them angels and demons. Tomorrow we'll call them something else. So we could, in the world standards, we can call them aliens. In the world standards, we can call them ascended masters, light beings, give them a name. But scripturally, I'll go back to the same beings that were depicted in Genesis 6, but even more so, fine-tuning it to the Table of Nations. What happened at Babel was God, he disinherited the nations, and he accounted them, he allotted them to the number of the sons of God.
Was that 70 or 72?
Yes, 70 I believe it was. Okay. 70, I think it depends on the translation. But what that says is that, these are the gods of the nations. These are the ones who have been worshipped throughout time. These are the ones of the nations who they set up the groves and the high places and offered sacrifices to them. They've been presenting themselves to humanity throughout time under different names, but under the same descriptions of their characteristics. Wow. So when you look at it in those kind of terms, and to also answer your question about are they otherworldly or interdimensional, through the document 6751, we did find that back in the 40s even, they were saying that they were interdimensional beings. Wow. So that will parallel with what Scripture has to say of fallen angels. With Job, for instance, I think I have that here. So you have Job, and this kind of is a crossover between our first film, Hollow Earth Chronicles, and the latest Higher Entities. But in Job, you have, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. So on one hand, you have him being able to present himself before the Lord, but he also is able to, and that's the spiritual realm. That's the things that we can't access. There's a barrier that's been put in place. But Satan and these divine beings, with the divine council, they were able to hold an audience before the Lord. At the same time, Satan says here that he's allowed, or that he's been going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. So that's an interdimensional feat. One of the other ones that we point out in the film is when Satan takes Jesus to, when he's tempting him in the wilderness, and he takes him to a very high place. He shows him all the kingdoms of the world at once. How is that even possible? That's an interdimensional feat again. So that to me, that was a big, hey, come look at this. That parallels with what we find in the document 6751.
Wow, that's just fascinating. The Bible is a supernatural book, and it tells us everything we need to know to survive in this world, and then some.
Mm-hmm.
Are these entities, are they the same, like UFOs that people have been seeing for centuries throughout history. It's been documented all the way back for thousands of years. UFO sightings and weird things in the sky. Is this what we're dealing with here?
I would have to say yes. In Scripture, you have the chariots that are mentioned. God's transport basically, and it ripping through the space time from the spiritual into the natural. I think that's basically the same thing that we're dealing with the UFOs, and because of the different deals that they've made with the governments, with the sharing of their technology, in order for them to have a safe space of being able to do whatever they do in the deep underground military bases. I think that some of the ones that you're seeing today are going to be basically the government taking that information and creating their own spacecraft, or
like the TR-3B?
That's a good example. There's different. Well, the technology that Standea was working on with anti-gravity craft, I think it follows along the same thing. You can go back to the Nazis with the Die Glocke and different things like that they made, which also they were highly involved with the occult. They didn't just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm going to try this, this, and this." There was a basis. They went in there and they performed rituals to get the information to be able to practice that.
Wow. So in order for them to get this information, a ritual is required?
I would think so. There are different barriers that God put in place to keep us from that. Now, He is sovereign, so He can come through and give people. The Scripture talks about it, giving them visions, giving them dreams, speaking to them. That's where the Scripture came from, was Him actually giving the word to man to pen. So He can do whatever He wants to with that. But we do find that in order to cross over to that, if somebody was going to take it upon themselves to do it, drug-induced visions and hallucinations, ayahuasca, different trips, DMT, that does allow you to cross over, or allows a person to cross over into those dimensions. Outside of that, the satanic ritual has proven to be the most effective, and from the research that we've done, the people that we've interviewed, that seems to be the constant. That's like it's a guarantee you're going to make contact if you do this.
Wow. So are they actually killing people and sacrificing this person in order to gain knowledge?
I would have to say yes, man. The one specific was the Ray Boucher interview. The people that came to him from the Department of Defense with these big red flags because of the Christian faith, they saw satanic ritual being performed, and they mentioned that blood rituals were being done to perform to make that contact. So yeah, I would say it's the same game. It's just still being done today.
Russ Disdale actually also he touches on this a little bit in his research. He says that in SRA and different satanic rituals, they when they kill somebody, it releases like adrenochrome, basically, spiritual, right? It releases some sort of spiritual outburst that the demons or whatever pick up on, and it allows them to come through. And it's just insane to think about that our government knows about this and maybe even sponsoring some of it.
Right. Well, it's worshiping the gods of old.
Yeah.
It's even in the Bible, you had the people offering their children, child sacrifice to these gods in order to appease them and to get blessings. It's the same thing, except they're just looking for technology and information and further advancements.
Do you think it's any coincidence that since this has happened, since the Babylon working ritual, we now have hundreds of millions of abortions per year, sacrificing? It's almost like modern times have gone back to the olden times, like we're going back into the days of Noah.
Definitely see there's a relationship with that. It's the same thing that was taking place, except it's internal. And I think there was even, New York, someplace.
Archer Vale?
Well, there's that too, but someplace that passed a law saying that post-birth abortions are okay. And so it's crazy. But I definitely see there's a relationship in that. There's an offering that's given from a human to a god, little g, an Elohim, and that's a form of worship. So yeah, I would say that's the case.
Sickening stuff, man. So, is everything in the other realm demons, or is there holy angels that live there too?
Yeah, I mean it's the spirit realm, and God. God exists outside of. I don't believe that the demons and the ones that have given themselves over to the pride of Lucifer and followed him with the fall. It's really hard to say if they're still able to hold to appear before him. Going by the thing in Job with the sons of God and Satan being able to do that, I definitely don't think that they're allowed because of who God is and because of him being righteous and just. He can't be a part of sin. Sin cannot be in his domain, So, but looking at God and his holy angels, the hosts of heaven that we're told about, and the angels being messengers coming down to be able to communicate with mankind, give them the scripture and different things like that. There's definitely a good and a bad that we're dealing with in the realm that we can't see.
So in higher entities, do these people, do they believe they're making contact with the good angels, or do they know for a fact that it's the bad angels and they're trying to take out Jesus, or do you think they're being deceived themselves?
That's a good question too. I think it would depend on the individual, because some are probably hell-bent on realizing what they are and moving, like reveling in that and moving forward into that.
Elite?
What's that?
Like the Collins Elite?
Yes. Well, with them, I would say that they would be on the other side of that, because they realize the true identity of these beings. And because of their Christian faith, they're not going to be. They had the red flags they had to throw up. They didn't want to be a part of it. They had convictions against it. The Collins Elite were a counterpoint group within different governmental organizations that were they were party to satanic ritual being used to make contact with these aliens or with these higher entities. And because of their Christian faith, they had the conviction. They saw this taking place, and they're like, well, we don't need to be a part of this. This is what the Bible talks about in the worship of demons and of other gods. And especially being, using blood sacrifice and different types of black magic to be able to accomplish it. So they saw that, and they didn't want to be a part of it. They also were able to tie this back to what Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did in the desert in the late 40s with the Babylon working ritual. And this is kind of moving forward into that direction. From that point, they ripped a hole open in space-time, and from that point afterwards, you had, regardless of what Parsons actually successfully completed during that with the Whore of Babylon and different things, after that, you had the Roswell incident, you had the Kenneth Arnold sightings, you had in '53 there was the swarm of UFOs that flew over the White House. And so there's this unleashing of supernatural activity that took place after that ritual was performed.
That's just it seems like it's too much to be a coincidence. So
Well, he took when they approached Jack Parsons about it, he took credit for it. He said, I think I'm the one who was responsible for this taking place.
Man, and to think that the government gave him money and power, and he started Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which still today is one of NASA's main entities.
Sure.
It's just it's mind blowing to think. And if you look at the NASA patches, half of them are occultic in nature.
Yeah. Well, we were in D.C. doing some work for the Belly of the Beast research, and we went to the House of the Temple, and they have a whole little area set up strictly for people that were Masons and NASA. I mean, patches and pictures and little doodads. Yeah.
Do you believe NASA is lying to us about the shape of the Earth? You want to get into that?
My personal thoughts are that it doesn't matter. I don't see who would be, who would gain, who would benefit in that type of a deception, because it's not a salvific issue. I think it's interesting on both sides. I've seen some pretty good arguments, and I've looked into it, but I don't really join that conversation, just for the fact of it's kind of like it causes division within the body of Christ.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to do that. I basically go back to what the Word of God says, what I can see, and my focus is furthering the gospel of Christ, not causing division.
Now, do you believe, this is maybe a little bit off topic here, but do you believe we landed on the moon? And there are some that say that contact was made with entities on the moon. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of evidence supporting that we didn't. I don't really know, man. I mean, as being a filmmaker and seeing the footage myself, and seeing sets and Walt, the Disney studios and different footage like that. I don't know. I guess it's going to go back to the firmament and being able to have access outside. I don't know. I'm more along the lines to think of that it's like that mindset of let's go to the moon, let's go to other planets and whatever. I'm all exploration, sure, that's great. But to me, it sounds an awful lot like the Tower of Babel.
Yep, absolutely. And we know what happened there, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so what is the end game of the higher entities? Why does the government? Why do they want to work with them? And what is their besides just information and power? Are they trying to? Do they have a goal? Are they trying to?
Yeah, I think that going back to the whole supernatural worldview, the world doesn't really have that right now. I mean, yes, we're getting there, and the majority of it can't even be founded. I mean, you can't prove things one way or another, and it goes back to people's experience. But what I do know is that in the end times, which I believe we're on our way. I believe the end times started at the foundation of the church, and that we're just further along than they were. But what the Bible does talk about is there's going to be things that come upon this earth that are going to cause men's hearts to fail them. And so, like right now, everybody is consumed with this Western civilization of idea of going to work and coming home and watching the ball game and getting married, 2.5 kids, dog and a cat, that whole deal. There's no room for supernaturalism there. But when that does take place, it's going to flip the world on its head. And so I think that this is kind of like we've already seen like a soft disclosure take place. And I think it's prepping the world for that. But even more so, I believe that it's tying into what the Bible says is going to take place. And ultimately, it's going to be pointing the world towards an antichrist, towards a false prophet promoting that antichrist. He's going to be able to call fire down from heaven. It's going to be some supernatural feats taking place in the eyes of men. And so if the world doesn't have a supernatural worldview, that's going to give it to them. And the Bible talks about generations seeking a sign, and and that whole deal, needing to see and touch and taste in order to believe. Well, we walk by faith and not by sight as being believers. But I think that all this is going to culminate pointing people to this so-called messianic figure that's going to be in the place of Christ. And for the church, the big thing on that end of things is that if they don't have a supernatural worldview, if they see this coming upon the world, if just specifically in Matthew 24, people claiming to be anointed, people claiming to be Messiah, which is just another word for anointed, and underneath that, anointed for an office, they're going to be coming in the name of Jesus. So they get their foot inside the church doors, and they're saying they're anointed, and they're going to be doing crazy lying signs and wonders. And so that would be believing in what they see and what they experience versus having faith in God and His Word.
Wow, man, it's scary stuff to think about, but we don't have to fear, right? I mean,
Not at all.
In the name of Jesus, He'll protect us, and I mean, is there anything that they can do to us as believers that we should be scared of?
I mean, they can't do anything to us that hasn't been done to other believers that profess Christ and that have lost their lives for Him. You know, the reason that majority of people fear death is because they don't have the knowledge of what takes place afterwards, or they revel in their sin. They enjoy it, you know, so they don't want to be taken away from that. They don't want to be held account for the things that they've done in this life. But, you know, with Christ, He defeated death. He defeated sin. He made a way for us. He provided us a way to be made right before God again. And being in these flesh bodies, the only way that we're going to cease from sin completely is to cross that final barrier of death. So once you realize that it's actually a good thing, that upon death, I'm not going to sin anymore. You know, I mean, we work it out, like Justin was saying about sanctification. That's the process that takes place from redemption, from justification until the point that we're glorified. And so that's that walk that we have to walk out on a daily basis. That's and we can't do it without Christ. We can't do it without Him. But to shed some hope on all this, man. And this also kind of crosses over with the hollow earth. But the verse that you were mentioning, sorry.
There is an ancient Indian saying that something lives only as long as the last person who remembers it. My people have come to trust memory over history, while history serves only those who seek to control it, those who would douse the flame of memory in order to put out the dangerous fire of truth. Beware these men, for they are dangerous themselves and unwise.
Hidden deep beneath the canyon walls of the New Mexico desert lies a mysterious ancient city, a place of magic rituals, astronomical alignments, and supernatural legends. This massive city was lost for centuries when its occupants seemingly vanished overnight, nearly 1,000 years ago. To this day, archaeologists and historians are unable to piece together exactly what happened here. So we traveled into the ruins, looking for any clues that will help us understand the true history of the canyon. What we soon would discover is a history far more shocking than anyone can believe. So join us for a unique look into Chaco Canyon, home of the Ancient Ones.
The Anasazi were an ancient culture that lived in the Colorado Plateau. No one knows why they built their fortified cities, but we do know that their entire civilization ended suddenly when they abandoned their homes. Some have speculated that the nature spirits worshipped by the Anasazi became destructive demons when the community ceased to maintain their sacred laws. These beings terrorized the population, often appearing to children before taking them away forever.
The ancient Anasazi people had superior knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, ritual magic, and some claim they also possessed supernatural abilities.
During research for our best-selling book, On the Path of the Immortals, I was given the unprecedented opportunity, really, to sit down with and to film Dr. Don Mose Jr., a third-generation medicine man who I met with for a large part of the day during our investigation, and he told me the oldest legends of the Anasazi, which he had been told by his great-grandfather, who likewise had been told by his ancestors, which included stories of the Anasazi turning to sorcery, to sacrifice, cannibalism, after they had lost their way and were driven insane by a reptilian creature, which they depict with a halo above his head, of all things. Images of that being are, by the way, included in the petroglyphs. And I believe that they likely attest to the fallen reptile or reptiles of biblical fame, which also misled humanity. He began drawing in the sand on the floor and reciting the first part of the story of the ancient Anasazi and how it had been repeated to him by his father and grandfather, who had also been told by their ancestors and so on, a legend that Dr. Mose alone had undoubtedly repeated hundreds of times before at the Navajo school. Now, since it was obvious to us that this Navajo historian was really indifferent to our camera and our recording plans, and in fact, I could tell he was really uncomfortable with us putting him on film, but thankfully, he let us proceed nevertheless. But I sat there and listened respectfully as he proceeded for nearly 2 hours to describe to this white man what's only ever been allowed a few times in history before, and that is the legendary stories of creation, of giants, of a great flood, of a reptilian deceiver, all from the voice of the nation's top medicine man. Dr. Mose even sang to us in the antiquated tongue of what I would call Old Testament history, paralleled in their earliest antiquity using the Navajo language.
For centuries, tribal elders have been telling stories of unbelievable supernatural events that occurred in the canyon. Events so shocking, the ancient ones carved pictures depicting these events into the canyon walls as a semi-permanent record of what happened here. The 15-mile-long canyon is home to over a dozen large complexes. The largest, named Pueblo Bonito, has over 800 rooms and sections that were over 5 stories tall. Tucked away on a cliff face, hidden behind Pueblo Bonito, lies one of the canyon's most telling secrets. 3 feet carved into the mountainside with 6 toes each. Are these 6-toed carvings showing the feet of a Nephilim giant depicted in the Bible? From the Book of Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 6, quote, "And yet again there was war with Gath, where was a man of great stature, whose fingers and toes were 24, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot, and he was also the son of a giant." Legends from all over the American Southwest speak of giants, 6-fingered, red-haired giants that used to terrorize these people. They speak of evil, cannibalistic giants that would terrorize the tribes with their hunger for human flesh. These giants are said to have inhabited these areas for thousands of years. Not only do they speak of giants, however, they also mention monstrous creatures that were summoned into the canyon. These creatures were carved into the canyon walls for everyone to see.
Not only did Dr. Mose substantiate the age-old and globally recorded story of those who come through portals and the impact that they have had on biblical and global history, past and present, not only did he weave Navajo Indian myths and legends seamlessly with our understanding of the 6 days of creation, the arrival of the Nephilim, and their connection to judgment by a global flood, followed by the repopulating of people around the world, and then a second incursion of the giants. But there were several instances in which, when I pushed Dr. Mose for greater detail, he would go off script, actually delineating from the official Navajo storyline to provide greater consistency between history and the way the Bible itself recorded certain events. For example, as Mose was following the official storyline, the one that you would get from the Parks Department in the 4 corners of the U.S., about how the Anasazi didn't disappear, but rather they slowly migrated out of the area and became the modern Pueblo Indians, I expressed doubts to Dr. Mose about that story. And he responded by grinning just a little bit and saying, "Well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but," and then he proceeded to tell us the older stories that his grandfather had repeated about these mysterious people actually disappearing after they came under mind control from a reptile with a halo, this carnivorous creature, suspiciously similar to what I later described in the Path of the Immortals book as fiery seraphim, which comes from the Hebrew seraph, the Hebrew Old Testament, fiery serpent.
All throughout Chaco Canyon are these massive circular structures called kivas. The kivas are perfect circles that are built into the earth for the purpose of magic rituals, ceremonies, and religious practices. They were used extensively by the Anasazi, who, according to their own verbal history, used the kivas to summon monstrous creatures into this dimension.
Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, "Oh, yes." And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to two of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind. As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, "You know, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, he said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors."
We know that the ancient ones used petroglyphs in order to document their history and events that happened to them. Petroglyphs like this, the spiral. The spiral is found over and over again in almost every ancient culture worldwide. The spiral symbol.
The angels, the sons of God, resemble who we call in ufology the Nordics or the Pleiadians, who are these beings who very much look like us. The misconception is that the fallen angels have a different appearance than the good angels. The bad guys look different than the good guys. The good guys are these beautiful angelic beings, and the fallen angels are these grotesque, demonic-looking entities with horns, and they're the typical Hollywood depictions of demons. But that's ludicrous. That is completely illogical. These entities, these beings, hail from the same race.
Lucifer is an angel, a fallen angel.
My name is Timothy Albrino, and you are
Angel, a fallen angel.
My name is Timothy Albrino, and you are watching End Times Productions.
Angel?
Yeah, an angel. Made again.
I see the angel of death.
So what you saying? You looking at some big black angel got sit down here to snatch your hunky ass out of there at the last possible minute?
The angel called us God's hands.
So we're like superheroes?
Every time that human beings encounter angelic beings within the biblical narrative, the description of the angels is always the same. They look like men. Indeed, Paul says that it's possible to entertain angels unawares, which means that you can confuse them for human beings. They're not human beings. They are, in fact, an extraterrestrial, non-human race, a pre-existent extraterrestrial, non-human race. But they are also sons of God, just like Adam was a son of God. And so it makes sense, therefore, that all the sons in the family bear the same semblance. They look the same, and they resemble their father. And it is my contention that both mankind and the elder race, the human race and the elder race, bear the image of God. There is no scripture in the Bible anywhere that states that mankind is the exclusive bearer of God's image. Rather, it just says that we were made in the image and likeness of the Elohim. And so we look like them because they are our elder siblings. We are reproductively compatible with them. So we are very similar, even physiologically, although they are of a higher nature. And so then the question is, what do they look like? And I think the answer is apparent within the canonized text of Scripture. They look like us, but with some differences. And we know that there has to be some differences because Lot was able to recognize them when they were approaching the city of Sodom. Lot saw two angels approaching and instantly was able to recognize that these were sons of God, emissaries from the kingdom of heaven. Now, how could he have recognized these angels? Because they looked human enough to where they could pass through town and be taken as exotic human beings, but they had distinctive trademarks, hallmarks, that were calling cards that they were not human beings and that they were indeed angels, that Lot recognized these hallmarks. And it also explains why the men of Sodom were so attracted to these exotic men who had entered the city. And I would imagine that these angels, when they entered Sodom, that they probably had cloaks on, maybe they were covering their heads and you could only see their faces, but from their faces, from what you could discern on their faces, they probably had blue eyes, fair skin, golden blonde hair, white or golden blonde hair. And oftentimes I get accused of being racist when I describe angels in this way. But what people don't realize is that this is actually the ancient Hebrew perception, conceptualization of what the sons of God look like. When you read the book of Enoch, at the very end of the book of Enoch, there is a fragment inserted into the story from the book of Noah. Now, whether or not the book of Enoch and the book of Noah are true accounts, they are ancient Hebrew accounts. They are part of the Hebrew cosmology. In other words, they are representative of the way that the Hebrews thought and conceptualized the world. And so in these fragments from the book of Noah, again found at the end of the book of Enoch, we have this strange story, this account that is being presumably recorded by Enoch, in which Lamech, the father of Noah, is distressed because his wife has just given birth to Noah. And when Noah came out of the womb, he had fair skin. So according to these fragments from the book of Noah, Lamech's wife was pregnant. And when she gave birth to her son, Noah, Lamech was extremely distressed when he saw this baby. Why? Because the baby resembled a son of God, one of the sons of God. And remember, Lamech, when Noah's born, Lamech is familiar with the sons of God, the watchers who created all this havoc, right? So he sees Noah come through the birth canal and pop out, and he looks like one of the sons of God. And so obviously Lamech is concerned because here he has a son that's coming. How can I say this? I almost feel like just reading it. This is what he says. And it seems to me that he has not sprung from me, but from the angel. Maybe I should just read this. Should I just read this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this will just make it, because I think this is an important point.
Our genomes have degenerated to such a degree that we are all mutants at this point. We're X-Men, but not in the good way, not like the comic book characters. We're really crappy versions of X-Men. We're X-Men in the opposite way. We're all broken down and pathetic copies of Adam, basically. Biologically speaking, cognitively speaking, and this is, of course, the inversion of what we're taught. We're taught that our ancient ancestors, our primordial ancestors, were apish, that they were cavemen, stupid cavemen, and that we have been gradually becoming a much more intelligent species. That is not true. We are accumulating over time deleterious mutations, and deleterious means bad, negative, destructive mutations. And it's a snowball effect. Further we get away from Adam, the more we are mutated. We're still humans, obviously. We're just really, really, really crappy humans. So our cerebral capacity, our physical fitness has been declining for thousands of years. And it's reaching a critical mass moment in which...
My name is Timothy Albrino, and you are watching End Times Productions.
One of the things that we need to comprehend when thinking about the purpose of mankind and the condition of mankind is the fact that we have degenerated from the original prototype, the original human prototype, and that was Adam. Adam is our progenitor, and Adam was created perfectly. And when I say perfectly, I mean that his genetic architecture was impeccable. There was not a single error in his genetic code.
Craft flying over Rainier, Washington back in 1947. He was flying a plane over Mount Rainier, Washington, and saw these 9 craft and said that they looked like they were saucers skipping on a pond. So that's where we got the term flying saucers. And after he saw those 9 craft, he wrote in his memoir that he was having poltergeist activity and all sorts of bizarre things happening in his home. And even his daughter, who's done multiple interviews, has said that there was all sorts of bizarre things going on in the household after that incident. This is Chad Riley, and you're watching End Times Production. If you come in direct contact, and it's not just things like that, it's even people who suffer from sleep paralysis and things like that as well. So, or even close encounters, it's all connected. And the fact that there's this hitchhiker phenomenon, that it spreads like a virus. So it spreads throughout your family and your friends and co-workers, and it could spread out into the neighborhood. Even the FBI document 6751, if you read that document, it says that the entities are not from another planet, but from another plane or another reality or another dimension, is the way that it's worded in those documents, or that document in particular. And it says that they are not normal sized like us. It says they are much larger. A lot of these people that have gone out to Skinwalker Ranch or some of these other things that we've discussed, when they are seeing these shadow people in their homes, some of them say that they are anywhere between 8 to 10 feet tall. And it doesn't just stop right there either. Even at S2, which is an Air Force base, and at S2, George Knapp has talked about they have seen shadow people out at these military bases, and that they are roaming and running around. Guards have encountered them and pulled guns on them. Well, if you listen very carefully to what the Navajo and the people are saying out there, especially the indigenous people, they talk about these things like they're more demonic entity. And this is coming from them. In fact, do you know much about the Great Witch Purge of 1878? That was not too long after they had been resettled. And they thought that part of the reason why they had been kicked off the land had something to do with witches. And so when they dug up the body of one of the Indians that had been buried, they found a copy of the treaty in that Indian's stomach, and they believed that it had something to do with witches. So they killed several members of their tribe, thinking that was the Great Witch Purge of 1878. They believed that the witches, they they commit these murders. They either commit a murder of somebody who's very close to them or somebody who's very near and dear to them, and that by doing so, it opens them up and gives them this power to shapeshift. But again, when you really look into this stuff, these things are coming from another dimension or another realm. Because out there at Skinwalker Ranch, they have seen these things, literally windows, portals opening up out there, and that they exit these portals, these windows, and they roam around. In fact, they had one that came out of a portal, ran across a field, another portal opened up, and it went through that portal and disappeared.
Is it another dimension? Like when you go through the door, is it another plane of existence?
They've even ran into the predator creature out there, not on one occasion, but at multiple occasions out there at Skinwalker Ranch. Back when Terry Sherman owned the ranch, they ran into the predator creature. A gentleman that had heard some of the news events about what was going on out there when they first started talking about it before Bigelow even showed up and bought the ranch. Somebody had drove out there and wanted to know if he could go out onto the property and pray or meditate. So he's sitting out there praying and meditating, and next thing they know, they keep hearing a cowbell, but none of Terry's cows had any cowbells on them. So all of a sudden, he saw something like a blur running from the tree line towards this individual who was sitting out there in the middle of this pasture. And whatever it was, he said it was humongous. He said it ran up and stood right over him, and he said it was louder than a bear and a lion. And it let out this humongous roar, and the guy actually jumped 6 feet back from a sitting position. And he was so petrified, he would not let go of them after they ran over and helped him back up. Finally, Terry had to tell him, he said, if you don't let go of me, I'm going to hit you. And he told him, he said, I'll let go of you, but you got to get me off this property. And he said, this property is cursed. He said, you're dealing with the devil.
You ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight?
This has been going on for a very long time because Franciscan monks who have been out there since 1776 have reported seeing 3 fireballs flying around in the sky out there. So this has been going on for a very long time. The Indians have known it even longer than that. And like I said, most of them, they won't even go near the ranch. And the ones that do, they usually take offerings or animal skins and they put them on the fence post to ward off the demonic spirits and keep them at bay. That's their words. Brandon Fugel, in an interview that he did with Sean Ryan, actually said that. And that's the thing, is that they don't even like talking about these entities. And it's not just that, but it's Wendigo. Any of these entities that you can name off, they do not like them being mentioned because, like they said, if you talk about them, it's invoking them. And they will come looking for you. So this sounds more demonic than anything. Even Jacques Vallée and a lot of these researchers, especially like Nigel Kerner and all these other ufologists out there that really study this, they all akin the whole alien thing, that it's more demonic than it is something coming from another galaxy or another world.
The Bible, what if it's connected?
Do you think it's connected?
Yeah, it's all absolutely connected. And from another, it's more demonic.
The Bible, what if it's connected?
Do you think it's connected?
Yeah, it's all absolutely connected. In fact, did you know that Kenneth Arnold and Jack Parsons were flying buddies? And Robert Goddard, who was another rocket engineer that was early pioneer in the rocket engineering, lived in Roswell, and he also knew both of these individuals. So you got that. So it's like you have the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and less than 2 weeks later, you have the Roswell crash, and that these individuals all knew one another. The U.S. Air Force started investigating Jack Parsons because of when he worked for Howard Hughes, and he had taken classified documents out of the facility without permission. And so once they started investigating him, that's what led them into learning that him, L. Ron Hubbard, understudies of Aleister Crowley, and that they had been doing this ritual called the Babylon Working between the years 1945 and 1946, and that supposedly they were successful in 1946. I believe that they actually did exactly what they set out to do, to bring about Babylon, the Whore of Babylon, and the Son of Perdition end times. In fact, it was Charles Race Tussle, who was the creator of Jehovah's Witnesses, who said that the end of the world would begin on October 14th, 1912? And that was the same day that Jack Parsons was born.
Okay, that's freaky. Okay. Yeah.
That's freaky, right?
What are the odds of that?
Right?
Well, not just the rituals that they were performing out there at his mansion that he lived at, but also whenever they would go out and they would do these rocket launches. He was performing rituals to the Greek god Pan and doing all sorts of things. I mean, this stuff, it gets really dark and really deep really quickly. In fact, the place that they would go out there and do these rocket tests was called Devil's Gate Dam. In fact, him and his Suicide Squad, another interesting term right there. And come to find out, the same Robert Goddard that we were talking about a while ago, that's where he did all his rocket experiments. The exact same location, Devil's Gate Dam. So, like I said, you're seeing coincidence after coincidence and just over and over overlap. It's all completely connected. In fact, looking into the Hitchhiker Effect, which is part of Skinwalker Ranch, that led me into the remote viewers. I found out, I thought they were the early pioneers of the Hitchhiker Effect because Uri Geller, one of the researchers, was part of SRI and the early remote viewing program. When they were researching him and looking into his powers, all the scientists that were assigned to researching him started having the Hitchhiker Effect in their homes and their families.
I can't do that
branch
yet.
of the CIA called MK Offen, and this branch, that was their thing, was that they got into the occult and esoteric, pretty much kind of like the Ahnenerbe was the Nazis' version. You know, they had several things like the Thule Society and Vril, but it was the Ahnenerbe who was really steeped in the occult as well as the Vril. But yeah, MK Offen, I mean, they would infiltrate seances. They would send members into seances. They actually openly talked with witches, active witches. In fact, one of the most well-known witches, this well-known witch was Sybil Leek. This lady, she was so well-known that H.G. Wells, Lawrence of Arabia, and Aleister Crowley all used to visit her back when she was 9 years old. Her family was that connected. In fact, when M.K. Offen was dealing with her and approaching her, she would tell them where the most active covens were. All the different locations of witches and covens all around the world. I mean, you know that also, what was it, Crowley and several of his colleagues, they all worked with British intelligence. So that's another thing, is like a lot of these people that are steeped in the occult and witchcraft and things like that and demonic and satanic rituals also have a lot to do with spies and spy agencies, different governments, intelligence agencies. I mean, there was a lady at the beginning of the film that you hear her talking about that she witnessed satanic rituals going on out at military bases. And she said that a lot of the people that are mixed up in the naval intelligence, not all of them, but a lot of them, are mixed up with the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis.
There was programming. They used military bases because they won't have any interference when they have someone on a military base. And a lot of my programming took place on military bases. I would like to talk about the fact that there are rituals done at the military bases also, and that rituals are not a cover. The people that do the mind control are involved, and rituals are very much a part of how they do things. For example,
it's too far away.
Naval intelligence members or people that are in naval intelligence
target something first.
Are usually very involved with Ordo Templi Orientis. And that doesn't mean that everyone in naval intelligence is involved in it. But naval intelligence is responsible for a lot of overseeing of ritual activity in this country. And they are responsible for a lot of this going on. There are other organizations, other agencies involved, but naval intelligence is very involved.
Well, not just that, but I don't know if you've read the book about Laurel Canyon. If you read any of that stuff and looked into it, oh god, yeah, the whole hippie movement. And I touched a little bit on this because people like Timothy Leary, who was big on promoting LSD and things like that, this was all part of the CIA and their MK Ultra as well as MK Alpha and all that. In fact, this goes all the way back to Edgewood, obviously. And they needed a giant pool of test subjects. So they were using the American public as guinea pigs so that they could see about tapping into powers, opening doors. And these kids thought that they were just doing this and that they were just tripping on acid and that they were having this experience, but they were opening doors to the demonic.
Everything they've experienced has been a manifestation of the demonic.
It's something demonic.
About dark forces and demonic attacks.
So I just gotta ask, what's going on?
What do you think's going on?
I think that they've been dealing with they've been initiating satanic rituals at all levels of government because they are trying to tap into these things. They want to make contact. It's no different than John Dee back when he was the person that worked for Queen Elizabeth. He was doing the exact same thing. He was tapping into the demonic and to get power, technology. And a lot of the things, that's the thing is that these rituals also, they're able to control humanity through what, most people think of as like MK Alpha and MK Ultra, things like this, where it's, like mind brainwashing, things like that. And it's actually occult rituals. And it's not just the United States government, it's multiple governments. In fact, at the end of the film, or towards the end of the film, I have the footage where it shows the explosion of UFOs that takes place from 1947 leading up to 2012. And when you get done watching that, you see that the United States, as well as Australia and England or Europe, were the most brightly lit places on the entire planet.
Like something out of Lovecraft. Oh.
I find it fascinating. Lovecraft fan, huh?
I suppose he was a friend of H.P. Lovecraft, and you're pulling Cthulhu right from there.
H.P. Lovecraft and Aleister Crowley both, around the same time, encountered an entity. Crowley said that it referred to itself as Cthulhu, and it was H.P. Lovecraft who said it revealed itself to him as Cthulhu. But there was Kenneth Grant, who was the secretary of Thelema, who took over Thelema and OTO after Crowley died. And he wrote a 9-book series called the Typhonian series. And in the one book, he came out and said that Crowley misunderstood. He said that he had encountered the exact same entity that H.P. Lovecraft did. He just misunderstood that they were the same entity and that it was actually Cthulhu. And Lovecraft, even Kenneth Grant in his book, Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God, he said that Lovecraft was dealing with things that he didn't fully understand. He had tapped into something, but he wasn't doing it through occult rituals. In fact, his father, I believed, was stricken with, I think his father actually went insane, if I remember correctly. And that, I don't know if these are generational curses or what, but I think at the same time, Lovecraft was tapping into things that invoked a lot of this stuff. And what he was writing about these old ones, he was just talking about fallen angels and nothing spirits. And so that was the reason that Kenneth Grant came out and said that he had been snuffed out because he was tapping into things but wasn't giving them the full credit that they deserved. And so that's why they took him out. We talked about Crowley, that he had invoked the first entity, AWAS. He never saw AWAS, he just dictated the Book of the Law. But in the Book of the Law, it actually stated or actually it was, Aleister Crowley was convinced that the Book of the Law was going to bring about the son of perdition, and eventually the end times was another thing. In fact, after it was released, when it first came out, World War I broke out quickly.
I don't have a target.
And then he decided to re-release the book right before World War II broke out. And once he re-released it, and then World War II broke out, he was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that it played some sort of a role in bringing about the end times and the son of perdition. In fact, he referred to this by invoking something, these world wars, so that there would be mass blood sacrifice and what he called baptism of blood for the son of perdition. Those aren't my words, that's Kenneth Grant's words. Well, Crowley never referred to them as alien or anything like. In fact, he didn't even refer to them as angels or demons. He just referred to them as Enochian entities, which is what John Dee used to refer to these individuals or these entities as. But yeah, when you look at the drawing that he did of Lamb, it totally looks like a gray alien. In fact, Stephen Greer, who does the CE5 research, so he does this. One of the things that they did out there in the desert where they were doing the CE5, a alien appeared flying over the group of people that was out there. And when you look at that photograph and put it right beside the drawing of Lamb, they're identical. Completely identical. And that's the thing is that, you know, most people think that this has to do with some sort of an alien hybrid program. It has nothing to do with that. They may be doing some of this stuff as far as like hybridization, but that's not what this is about. In fact, Nigel Kerner, one of the leading ufologists, he came out and said that him and John Mack, and who else was it? Whitley Strieber, they all three say that this has something to do with the human soul. They are trying to somehow implant themselves into the human soul. So you gotta ask yourself, why are they so fascinated with the human soul?
Sometimes something so bad happens, and a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest.
I believe that this is all antediluvian. You know, the whole, you know, nothing new under the sun. You know, people think of things like Star Trek and Star Wars. It's like they think they're looking to the future, but you're actually looking into the past. Whatever you could think of, it's already been done. And the whole thing about these craft, Bob Lazar was talking about the 9 craft for a long time. He's actually taken people like John Lear and Phil Snyder and all them have gone out there with him. They've seen the craft flying around. In fact, he got arrested and he threatened his life, and that's why he ended up leaving the program. And he went public about it because he thought that they were going to kill him. Bob Lazar had already came out and said that, you know, one of the craft that they had found out there, and this was in the Joe Rogan podcast, he told Joe Rogan that one of the craft they had out there was actually found at an archaeological dig. So it wasn't just old, it was ancient. So when you think of things like Vimanas, you hear stories about these craft that can fly from continent to continent, pole to pole, you know, that Admiral Byrd was talking about. So this is not anything new. Now, David Rush, you know, that's a little more current. He's the whistleblower that came.
This episode of the Y-Files is brought to you by Delete Me.
I thought I was a...
The space race began as soon as World War II ended. America struck first, launching fruit flies on a V-2 rocket to study radiation's effects on living organisms.
Oh, the V-2 designed by Werner von Braun.
Yes?
Did you know that von Braun was a Nazi who joined the SS, won 2 medals, and attained the rank of major?
Yes, I knew that.
Oh, did you know von Braun's rockets were built using slave labor from concentration camps?
Yes.
The rockets killed 9,000 civilians in London, but 20,000 prisoners died building the rockets. Multiple survivors said von Braun ordered this, though he denied it.
I know.
But when von Braun agreed to work for the United States under Operation Paperclip, his war crimes were forgiven. He became the first director of NASA's Flight Center.
Okay, that's all true, but every time we talk about von Braun, are you going to bring up the Nazi stuff?
Every time.
Okay, let's...
Every time.
Fine, cool.
By the way, von Braun got along really well with Walt Disney.
What does that have to do with anything?
A few people out there know what I'm talking about.
The Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957. It was their first victory in space over the United States, but not their last. Both nations poured billions into their space programs. To the American public, the space race was about technological superiority. Landing on the moon became the ultimate prize. But behind this public competition, something else was happening. The US and Soviet Union were working together in secret, and their goal wasn't the moon. It was to establish a human colony on Mars. They called it Project Red Sun. The project was inspired by earlier plans, specifically Project Horizon. Proposed in 1959, Horizon was a plan to put a nuclear-armed military base on the moon. A lunar base would give America unmatched military power over the entire planet. The Soviets would be defenseless.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
But as nuclear arsenals grew, both sides realized a war would destroy humanity. So they created a backup plan. If nuclear war or a natural disaster threatened Earth, the human race would continue on Mars. Getting there wouldn't be easy. The moon is 239,000 miles away, a 3-day journey. Mars is a different story. Its distance from Earth varies between 34 million and 250 million miles as both planets orbit the Sun. America had the Saturn V, the only rocket powerful enough for the journey. The Soviets had better safety systems and life support technology designed for extended space travel. The trip to Mars would take 6 months. Alone, neither side could do it, but together, Mars was within reach. On March 23rd, from a secret facility deep in the Amazon jungle, the most powerful rocket in the world was launched.
Hang on.
What?
Why are they launching rockets from the jungle?
Well, NATO and Warsaw Pact nations tracked every launch from the US, Europe, and Asia. But a rocket lifting off from Brazil in the southern hemisphere, no one would notice. That rocket carried humanity's most advanced spacecraft, the Interplanetary Space Vehicle, or ISV Columbus. Its crew included 2 Americans, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Ilyushin.
I don't have a target.
Columbus touched down on Mars 158 days later. The crew documented everything they saw. Their logs, films, and video recordings went straight to NASA's classified archives. The public could know about Project Red Sun. So why hide mankind's greatest achievement? Because once the crew landed on Mars, it didn't take them long to realize they weren't alone. In 2011, Italian journalist Luca Scantamburlo held a press conference to announce that Project Red Sun was real. He had witnessed statements from Project Red Sun workers, emails, documents, but that wasn't the big reveal. At the bottom of his statement was a photograph that silenced the room, a grainy image of Buzz Aldrin walking on Mars. When it comes to Mars, Buzz gets excited, and that's when he lets secrets slip.
Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there? Who put that there?
Now, maybe Aldrin only saw images of the monolith, but other astronauts dropped similar hints. Gene Cernan was the last person to walk on the moon. He spoke about going back to Mars.
Buzz does want to go back to Mars, and I support that, but I believe we should do it in a logical stepping stone process.
Okay, maybe he misspoke, but a minute later, he said it again.
Good to talk to you. Thanks. But John, can I just say one other real quick thing? You know, I'm not going to be there when we go back to the moon and on to Mars, and it may not be this president or those who follow.
Scantamburlo had more. A whistleblower he called Bravo X Sierra 24 smuggled photographs out of NASA's archives.
I introduce to you a press release testimony I have written to discuss the presumed existence of a hush-hush military space program called Project Red Sun, carried out in the 1970s of the last century to build a stationary base on Mars, the Red Planet. My source of information, named by me, Bravo X Sierra 24 contacted me by email. It is possible to reproduce the pages of the press release and the picture presented here as well.
The images are blurry but unmistakable. Astronauts collecting samples on rust-colored terrain, a temporary habitat, a rover. One photo shows astronauts examining an artificial object in a crater. Behind them stands a pyramid reminiscent of ancient South American structures. NASA denied everything.
Yeah, of course they did. Never a straight answer.
The denials made sense. The photos are terrible. But Scantron Burlow wasn't finished. As word of Project Red Sun spread, more whistleblowers emerged. And now he had evidence of a 1973 Mars mission. Actual video footage. Now, to be honest, a lot of people have requested I cover Project Red Sun. But a press release and some blurry orange photos didn't sound like much of a story to me. Then someone sent me the video, and I was hooked. The footage opens with NASA's logo and an internal use only warning. A title card appears. Welcome to ISV Columbus. Date, 1973. The next shot shows Earth through a spacecraft window. Then quick shots of the astronauts aboard. Another card marks day 10 of their journey. Earth and the Moon drift past the windows. At 1 minute 7 seconds, the shot reveals they've traveled much farther from the Earth. Day 100. More glimpses of the crew. Beyond those early views and brief interior shots, we don't see very much. But then at 1 minute 46 seconds, we're at day 158. They should be close to Mars. An astronaut moves past the camera. A reddish blur crosses the frame.
Wait. Was that in the
camera? A reddish blur crosses the frame.
Wait. Was that Mars? Did they really show Mars on this thing?
They do. We're only halfway through the film, and you're not going to believe how it ends.
I need to get closer.
The Columbus journey lasted 158 days. Soviet life support systems and radiation shields kept the crew alive, along with experimental technologies inspired by Project Horizon. The crew logged everything they saw. Years later, their records leaked. Then came the film. Columbus approaches the red planet.
Holy sh...
I know, and watch your mouth.
Sorry. This is unbelievable.
Oh, just wait. As we get closer, we can see Mars's features more and more clearly. At 2:06, the planet's terrain fills the windows. Some quick crew shots, then the camera captures Columbus's exterior. Below is Valles Marineris. The image finally focuses as we zoom toward the canyon at 2:59. At 3:12, Mars's surface appears in stunning detail. More surface features, a little more inside the ship, and then this amazing view of Victoria Crater. A few more shots of the crew, then we begin the descent to the surface.
Oh, I'm gonna need my glasses.
Yeah, the Apollo missions had this problem too. The astronauts took actual film, so the images are pretty clear, but the external cameras were television cameras recording video, so they're not good at all. Still, we can get a sense of the landscape and the speed.
It's too far away. I need to get closer.
Finally, the landing module touches down. But look closely.
What the hell is that?
I don't know, but it's not wind. Something is definitely moving down there. It looks like it's under the surface.
Shiolud! They're the sandworms from Dune.
I know what they are.
They're the sandworms from Dune.
I know what they are. Anyway, the video ends there. NASA continued to deny Project Red Sun. Sure, the film could be fake, the photos could be fake, but NASA fakes photos and film too. Nobody knew who to trust. Then came the bombshell. A new witness stepped forward. Not only was he part of Project Red Sun, he said it was still operational and had been to Mars that year. And he brought video to prove it. Secrets don't stay buried forever, especially something as big as a hidden mission to Mars. Decades after Project Red Sun's supposed landing, insiders began talking. Jackie, a retired NASA employee, called into the Coast to Coast radio show.
Without Bill.
George Norrie.
Oh.
Jackie described watching a Viking lander's live feed from Mars in 1979. The camera captured two men in protective suits walking toward the lander.
They came over the horizon walking towards the Viking Explorer, and our vision got cut off. I didn't see what they did with it or anything else.
They were probably making repairs.
Jackie said there were 6 other witnesses watching the feed with her. NASA cut the feed when they realized their mistake. Jackie said the Viking program wasn't searching for life on Mars. It was covering up missions already there. William Rutledge came forward in 2007. The retired astronaut claimed he flew on the ISV Columbus and ISV Melbourne. He said Apollo 19 and 20 continued in secret. Their missions were to retrieve alien technology from both the Moon and Mars. Rutledge described finding alien tools, spacecraft pieces, even a preserved body. We covered Apollo 20 in another episode. It's one of my favorites. And if you've never seen it, you're not going to believe the photos.
Apollo 20 video down here in your chatterpot.
According to Rutledge, NASA and the Department of Defense launched several manned missions to Mars through Project Red Sun, some as recent as 2011. And here's video from that mission. A distant shot of Earth. Then we get closer to Mars. You can see the color is much better now. Here's a shot of the astronauts. There's Mars out the window as we get closer. Now the video becomes spectacular. Through the window, we can see Martian terrain very clearly.
Holy...
I know, and what'd I tell you?
Sorry. Go ahead.
That video and the testimony of Jackie and William Rutledge align perfectly with records leaked by another whistleblower, Gary McKinnon. Gary is a Scottish computer engineer, and he accessed Pentagon and NASA systems in 2002. You'll hear it reported that Gary hacked into NASA. He didn't. He scanned their networks and found computers that had weak passwords or no passwords at all. He said he was looking for evidence of UFOs, but he stumbled onto something bigger, a spreadsheet labeled non-terrestrial officers, and a list of Navy ships that don't appear in any official registry. We go into all the details in our Solar Warden episode, which is about America's secret space program.
Link to Solar Warden down yonder.
Physicist Dr. John Brandenburg has a theory that an ancient Martian civilization was destroyed by a nuclear attack from an alien race. He believes NASA is hiding evidence of this ancient conflict. His theory is grounded in science, and we explored this in the Face on Mars episode.
Link is it's below.
NASA dismisses these stories with vague denials. Whistleblowers are branded disgruntled or untrustworthy. It's a common tactic. Raise questions about their credentials, question their motives, and watch the media mock their claims. But if these claims are fantasy, why monitor and intimidate whistleblowers? There are a disturbing number of cases where whistleblowers report being followed by what we'd call men in black, and soon after they end up in fatal car crashes or have heart attacks. Are all these cases a coincidence?
Nope, it's murder. Murder most foul.
It sure seems that way. But those are pretty aggressive measures to protect a fantasy. Denials will only work for so long. For every whistleblower that's silenced, another emerges with more.
We don't go to bed tonight at 2. And if I get elected tonight, we celebrate, and you get beers, and we get alcohol. 1,000%. Or I'm happy to give you the throne if it doesn't happen. You're welcome. We still cook together.
We cook together.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, that was nice of you to take that from me. But, that's a great question. I wanted to say curfew just because that was a lot of things, but I guess maybe timeout time from the game, meaning like if, we all...
More details. They can't suppress them all, not with stakes this high. If Project Red Sun is real, it's humanity's greatest achievement. It doesn't belong to a select few gatekeepers. It belongs to all of us. We own the information. We're not going to learn the truth by asking for permission. We have to demand it. The story of Project Red Sun is a frustrating one. Like I said earlier, lots of people asked me to cover this, but the images were so bad I didn't think it was worth it. The story's obviously fake, but then someone sent me the video, which got me interested. Then I started researching and saw there might be something to the story after all. But first, let's dismantle the hoaxes. Yes, both videos are fake. Frame 1, the NASA logo. Fine. But look at the pixelation. Now the warning. The text is crisper. This is an edit. We're not off to a good start. This shot of Earth was taken from Apollo 8, rotated and blurred.
Oh, so they use fake images of a fake moon mission to make a fake video about a fake Mars mission?
Can we just focus on this for now?
Link to fake moon landing episode down in your chum bucket.
Bill Anders, Apollo 8. Here's the Earth-Moon system from space. Scale is all wrong, but the scale is right in this shot. That was taken from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter mission in 2022. Gene Cernan, Apollo 17. More Apollo 17, but the shots are taken out of order. Day 158, Mars approach. Wait, Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14. That's from the Mars Global Surveyor mission in 1999, blurred and brightened to wash out the color. Oops, film sprocket holes are supposed to be on the left and right side, not top and bottom. More Apollo 14. Global Surveyor again. Now we can match up the features. I love this one. That's from a photo of the Soyuz TM-33 docking with the International Space Station on October 23, 2001. But the Soyuz was pulled out. The original was from Wikimedia Commons. Martian North Polar Ice Cap, 1999. Lifted directly from Wikipedia. Destiny Module, 2001. Apollo 14. And then this amazing shot of Victoria Crater taken from Wikipedia. And before landing, we have this perfect shot from Apollo 7. And here's the Mars landing. This is from the movie Alternative 3, released in 1977. As far as fakes go, I thought it was pretty good. The original fake was created by someone named The Faking Hoaxer, and you could see his watermark on the video. But most people post his video cropped in without the watermark, and most versions have the Apollo footage removed, so it's not quite so obvious.
Well, this has been thoroughly disappointing.
Sorry. Now, I can't debunk the entire story of Project Red Sun, but I can shred that second video.
No.
Gene Cernan, Apollo 17. Some images from Luca Scantamburlo's report. Most of these are also Apollo 17. This one is obviously out of place. It's from the BBC documentary Exploring Mars. The same Mars Surveyor photo from before, but this time the color is more visible. Mariner 7 mission. Expedition 40 in the summer of 2014, astronauts Steve Swanson and Reed Weissman on the ISS. This is a good one. You can tell this is the ISS from the windows. Here's how they did it. Grab an image from the ISS and pull it into After Effects or some kind of video editor. Mask out the window. Throw some orange behind it. Crank up the contrast. Dirty up the windows. Make everything just a bit blurry. I know my version isn't perfect, but I did that in about 8 minutes. And if you look at the hoaxed video, you can see they were just as sloppy with the mask as I was. The edges aren't round. That's someone who doesn't know their way around a Bezier tool.
Bezier what now?
Bezier, it's the tool that lets you draw curves.
Then call it a curved drawing tool. Bezier sounds elitist.
It's French.
Exactly.
These shots are nice too. They're from the European Space Agency. We've got the Yanni Chaos region, the Corrales Chaos.
Why do they call these areas chaos?
Because they're chaotic.
That's it?
That's it.
I was hoping for something more, outer spacey sounding.
How about this? This is Cassivalis and Sacrifosse. Casse is the Japanese word for Mars. It literally means fire star. Valles is Latin for valleys. And sacra means sacred or holy. Fosse is plural for the word fossa in Latin, which means ditch. So Sacrifossa means...
Holy ditch.
Basically, yeah.
Now we're talking.
Another area of Cassivalis. And the video ends. So both videos are thoroughly debunked.
Let me ask you, how long did it take you to find all those shots there, boyo?
It took me well over 100 hours of searching Apollo footage and images from every space program and Mars mission going back to the 1960s.
Yeah, and you wonder why you burn out?
I don't wonder that.
You spent 2 weeks working on 4 minutes episode.
Yeah, it's called commitment.
It's called OCD.
I can't argue with that. So the videos are definitely fake. As for Jackie from NASA, I couldn't confirm anything about her story. She didn't sound like a scientist to me, but who knows, she might be telling the truth. William Rutledge is considered defunct. There's no record of him being an astronaut. It's not like there are that many astronauts. There are records of all of them.
Yeah, not if they're secret astronauts.
That's true, and that's what Rutledge says. There's no record of him because it's classified. Which brings us to Gary McKinnon. He says that he found proof of a secret space program, and I believe him.
It was an Excel spreadsheet, and there was a non-terrestrial officers list, and I can't remember the file name of the spreadsheet, but the heading on the column was non-terrestrial officers. Well, obviously, it wasn't aliens. It wasn't, little green men. I took it to just think it must be evidence of an off-Earth fleet. If you have non-terrestrial officers, you must have spaceships that are based in, maybe geostationary orbits, who knows?
Now, I don't know if there really is a secret space program, but I believe Gary found something. And whatever he found was so sensitive that President Obama, the DOD, and the DOJ tried to have him extradited to the U.S. They wanted to put him in prison for 70 years.
For accessing computers with no password? How was this on him?
The charges filed against Gary say that he wasn't authorized to access those systems. The charges fail to mention that NASA and the DOD were sloppy with their network security. That's one of the reasons why the UK didn't allow the extradition.
He will not be going to the United States anytime soon.
Here, God save the Queen, pip pip.
Yeah, that was a pretty big deal. The United States isn't used to hearing no.
And I trust that this will get resolved in a way that underscores the seriousness of the issue.
The coalition came into power. They blocked the extradition.
But also underscores the fact that we work together and we can find an appropriate solution.
He will not be going to the United States anytime soon.
Now, what doesn't help the story is that movie I showed you before, Alternative 3, that aired in 1977 as a mockumentary about a secret space program to Mars by Apollo astronauts in coordination with the Soviets.
We obtained an acceptable picture, which you're now about to see as we saw it.
And when it aired, people thought it was real. And Project Red Sun seems to follow along with that plot almost exactly. So some of the evidence of Project Red Sun can be dismissed, but not all of it. A lot of Project Red Sun's claims were later proven to be true, like there was once water on Mars. Lots of it.
Tonight, for the future of everything, we're going back 3 billion years into the past. Picture Mars as a world with water. According to NASA, oceans covered as much as 20% of the red planet.
And the documents leaked to Scantum-Burlo have coordinates that overlap with rover landing sites. Now, if I were a conspiracy theorist...
It's too far away.
Right. If I were one of those, I would be suspicious. It's almost as if NASA is carefully managing the flow of information and expectations about Mars exploration. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence. This is happening at the same time that space exploration is becoming privatized.
And if you warm Mars up, you will, there's a bunch of frozen CO2 that will evaporate thence by the atmosphere, and you could actually want kind of global warming on Mars.
As companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin head toward Mars, they'll operate with less public oversight than government agencies. You know that if Elon Musk lands than government agencies.
Open your mind.
You know that if Elon Musk lands on Mars, he's going to tell us what he finds. The U.S. government doesn't want Elon exposing them for lying to the public.
You mean exposing them for lying to the public again?
Right. So while SpaceX prepares to go to Mars, NASA can slowly release more and more information. So that by the time SpaceX gets there are no more surprises.
It's too far away.
And NASA's probably okay with this. Elon thinks he'll be making history by landing human beings on Mars. But it may very well turn out that all he did was create the perfect cover for a classified space program that truly never ended.
Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I am an American Indian healer in training in northern Canada, learning part-time about communication with spirits and drawing power from nature and the earth. I will have to keep some of my personal information and certain experiences vague, and there is still a lot I don't know. But if anyone has questions about my religion or the rituals I've participated in thus far, I will make an effort to answer as best I can. I have permission from my teachers to talk candidly about most of my experiences, but I cannot provide pictures. I might drop in and out of the thread as long as it's up, but I will make a post saying when I'm done answering questions so nobody wastes a bump.
How did you find yourself in this role? Is it hereditary or something more like a calling you received?
Like a lot of religious people, I was very lost and in a bad way when I found it. I was a young adult, 19, and had just lost my girlfriend in an accident. I was handling my grief very poorly, and my grandfather thought a sweat would be appropriate. I was raised away from my tribe, half-blooded, and was visiting with my grandfather on the reserve when I went to my first sweat lodge ceremony. After what I experienced in the lodge, we'll elaborate, I decided I would make an effort to move back onto tribal land permanently and reconnect with my people. And when one of the teachers caught wind of my plans, he personally recommended that I start firekeeping to get started. He said I had the right demeanor and attitude for the job, and to learn, so I took his offer.
I need to get closer.
Are Wendigo, skinwalkers, or similar creatures real? Why do millions of people who camp or live in the wilderness never hear or interact with them? Not being skeptical, I want to hear your perspective. Are they confined to certain times or conditions? How does one protect oneself against them?
Skinwalkers are more of a Navajo southern tribe thing to my knowledge, but Wendigo are a somewhat common belief in my tribe. Their scarceness is explained by stories of them shape-shifting and manipulating rather than rampaging and hunting people, though they still do that. Wendigo work differently based on which tribe you ask and which clan within that tribe you ask. But the version I know is that they carry a vicious blizzard with them. Going out in the snow at night attracts them, and they will take the shape of another person lost in the blizzard to draw you in. Each winter usually kills at least one person per island, and in some cases, it was people wandering off into snowstorms for no real reason, then suspiciously disappearing. So usually they lurk in the snow and look for people who are alone. However, the process of becoming a Wendigo is more nuanced. There is a very old belief that cannibalism is the worst sin, more so than murder. Eating another person is the most despicable, greedy, inhuman thing you can do, and demonstrates that you care for nobody but yourself. Like a drug, it is addictive, and no matter your reasons for doing it once, you will eventually want to do it again. Nature rejects you, giving you a form that is neither man nor animal, and makes you into a mindless monster that can only think of eating and taking things from others. Many eyes to greedily search for things to take, huge mouths to consume as fast as possible, huge bodies and strength to show they cannot be stopped without killing them, but scrawny and malnourished to show they will never be satisfied. You could take the story of the Wendigo as a warning against greed and corruption, or perhaps substance abuse, and that makes them very real. I do believe that, like the Wendigo, people can lose sight of themselves and lose their humanity, becoming something else. My first sweat, part 1. I was brought out to one of the elders' homes early in the morning in late fall, where he, my main teacher, and a few others had already built a large fire and were collecting fresh green branches to form the frame of the lodge. They were then stuck into the ground and bent into a dome, then tied at the top. We didn't have enough skins to make a strictly traditional lodge, so we used tents and tarps for the cover. The dome was covered completely in multiple layers, and they were arranged so that absolutely no light could get in when the door flap was closed. At the bottom of the fire were heavy round river stones that were smooth all over, and one of my teachers, who I will call Black Bear, was in charge of keeping the fire steady and ensuring that the stones were glowing the right color and temperature. The idea is that you need old stones from a riverbed that are visibly aged and worn down, and thus allow water to run over them evenly, producing more steam. The smoother the stone, the cleaner it will burn. I respect Black Bear greatly, but everyone acknowledges he doesn't take ceremony as seriously as expected of him as an elder. While it's not disallowed, he spent too much of his time firekeeping, cracking jokes, and wandering away from the fire. I only spoke when spoken to, and spent most of the morning just staring into the fire, which apparently is what my teachers were looking for in a student. I was given a small handful of dried, shredded tobacco that Black Bear grew, and told to walk around the fire 3 times before throwing it in, saying "Miigwech" in thanks. This is meant to be an offering to the spirits who live in the lodge, and ask them to heal and cleanse you.
I'm out of range.
Then I sat back down and we passed around a long wooden peace pipe my grandfather made. Each person around the fire would smoke a few puffs of the same tobacco as before, passing it clockwise, and turning the pipe in your hands 3 times before passing it on. My main teacher, who I will call Laughing Bear, made a joke about one of the grandmothers, the title for female elder who has had biological grandchildren, arriving in jeans. She went home to change into a skirt, and joked about the old idea that spirits can get confused about who you are if you're not dressed accordingly, and their guidance may not work if they think you're someone or something else. This is also why nobody wore animal skins or regalia to this sweat, though some different kinds of sweat allow it. Also, traditionally, a sweat is segregated by age and gender, so everyone has similar endurance. There are men's, women's, and elders' sweats, but my first one was mixed because we could only run one that year. My grandfather wasn't happy about it, but we went ahead. Inside the lodge was a shallow pit in the middle, and the dirt floor was covered in loose sand to dry it. When the firekeeper, Black Bear, declared that the river stones were ready, the men stripped, and Laughing Bear began to sing and strike his buckskin drum with his hands. Traditionally, you'd go into the lodge nude, but shorts or underwear are acceptable. The women and kids were exempt because of the mix and entered fully clothed. The sweat lodge is meant to simulate the womb, and by entering, you are re-entering the womb of the Mother Earth, so you may be reborn, stronger. I was seated next to the door, but there was a little boy, a little girl, a woman my age, an older woman, my grandfather, and Laughing Bear all in when it was full. Before my grandfather and Laughing Bear entered, we were instructed to close our eyes until told otherwise. I did. Black Bear then took a pitchfork and started carrying in the glowing hot river stones, then placing them in the pit. Every time he put down a stone, my grandfather put a bit of cedar on the stone and let it burn. It made pure white smoke and squealed loudly. Its cries would attract mother spirits, like a baby. The lodge was small, and even sitting cross-legged I had to fold in half just to fit under the low roof. There was just enough room that I didn't burn my feet on the hot stones, but it was tight. The door was shut and we could open our eyes. It was pitch black. All you could see was the glowing stone and burning cedar. Already it was hot, and we sat in silence for a few minutes. I watched the cedar smoke form shapes, and was told to watch for anything I recognize. I saw a stag with long antlers many times. Then Black Bear knocked on the door flap, and we shut our eyes again as Laughing Bear started singing. This time he used the old tongue rather than wordless chants like before. I still don't have it memorized or know how to write it out with English letters, I'm afraid. Black Bear opened the flap and passed a pot of cold river water from the same river as the rocks to Laughing Bear. The door was shut, and Laughing Bear put down his drum to ladle water onto the stones. Immediately it was so hot and humid I could barely breathe, but he kept scooping on more, pouring slowly so he wouldn't cool the rocks too much. I coughed and felt like I was drowning. I thought I was sweating, but actually the steam in the air was condensing on my skin because I was so much cooler than the air. It was about 30 minutes before I really started to sweat. It felt like every pore on my body opened at once. I could feel it pouring down and soaking the sand. With the singing and drums, it was so loud that I couldn't pick out words anymore. I was dizzy and sick, especially since I'd been fasting for the whole day. It was completely overwhelming and at times very painful, but then I'd start sweating again and my skin would stop sizzling. Laughing Bear ended his song and told us each to cry out what was currently troubling and important to us. Be loud, be honest. Nothing leaves the lodge. I can't tell you what anyone said, including myself. The younger woman started sobbing uncontrollably and had to compose herself before the next spoke. When everyone was done speaking, there was an even louder song. Then the little ones left. This was about 1 hour in. It went on. More hot stones were added, and more cold water was poured. More cedar burned, and the drums got louder. 2 hours in, when the intensity went up again, the women left. At this point, I was shaking from heat exhaustion and fatigue, but if I slumped or passed out, I would burn my face on the stone, so I stayed up. I chanted along with Laughing Bear and my grandfather, if only to get the water out of my lungs. Then I started seeing things. As long as the door was shut and the elders said so, I could open my eyes. The first thing I saw was a ring of light around Laughing Bear's drum, pulsing every time he hit it with his shaker, slowly getting brighter. I could clearly see the outline of the shaker and the flashing light in the pitch black, even though I had seen neither his drum nor his shaker before I went in. When I saw the light, I shouted, but I couldn't look away no matter how far I turned my head. It got so hot that no matter how much I sweat, I still felt my face burning. Laughing Bear's and my grandfather's voices sounded like hundreds of voices, including women and children. Then my heart started pounding, which worried me because of my arrhythmia. Before I could panic, though, I felt hands on my back. It was like someone with thin, delicate woman's cool hands was pressing and massaging my back, calming me down like a baby. I heard more women's voices, including my late girlfriend, singing. That was when I lost control and started sobbing, but I had no tears, only sweat. My eyes were clear and I saw the drum light even while I was screaming. My hair was soaked and running down my back. It felt like it was burning me to touch my own hair, but the woman's hands washed it away before it got unbearable. I felt like I loved her. The lodge didn't get any cooler, but I did calm down. I saw flashing lights even when there was no singing, and I still felt a woman's hand stroking my back for at least an hour before it started to fade away. When water was dripping down my face, I thought it might be her fingers running over my cheeks and lips. By the time her hand completely faded, the door flap opened, and all of the steam escaped in a big cloud. We sat in the lodge for maybe 20 minutes while it emptied out and cooled down. Then I had to try and crawl out. I couldn't stand up. When I dragged myself out and collapsed, Black Bear told me I had been inside for almost 5 hours, and that I did well. I could have left at any point. My knees felt like they were on fire from being folded so tightly, and I felt like whenever I stretched, my skin was tearing. According to my grandfather, my eyes were bloodshot, completely red. I blacked out for a few minutes in the cold dirt, and someone threw my sweater over me. Then I woke up feeling perfectly rested. My skin was fine. I didn't feel dirty or greasy. The steam washed my actual sweat away. I didn't even smell. I felt remarkably clean. We went into Laughing Bear's house where his wife had cooked moose meat. I drank some of the river water that was used for the ceremony and felt calmer than I had in years. I didn't have any dreams right after, but I slept better than ever in my life that night. That was when I decided I wanted to learn more. I was only visiting that first time, but decided to move back up north and be with Bear Clan. I still do now. I still want to learn more. What I saw and felt in that first lodge will stay with me forever.
I need to go closer.
This one is my favorite. It's more modern, 1960s, but it used to give me nightmares. I'm not a great storyteller, so bear with me. Out on our reservation in Nevada, my grandmother would play around with all her siblings. Towards the back of our land was a small cemetery that the elders would be buried in. They were always told never to play over there because it was disrespectful and would cause the spirits to become angry. My grandmother and uncles, 4 of them, were actually smart and never played there. That is, until one day they were fishing in a nearby stream when they heard faint cries coming from the direction of the cemetery. My uncles had set up snare traps near the cemetery to catch rabbits, so that's what they figured the cries were. Rabbits weren't their favorite, but it sure as hell was better than government commodities, so they went out that way to collect their catch. To their surprise, the traps were empty, but the cries got louder. They hiked up a nearby hill to make sure that someone wasn't in trouble. That's where they found a small, haphazardly built cabin sitting at the base of the hill. Traditionally, you aren't allowed to build any structures within a certain radius of the cemetery out of respect. I think it's half a mile. And this cabin was only about 500 feet away. They had never seen it before and knew that whoever was in there wasn't Indian, because everybody knew the traditions. My grandmother wanted to go back home and tell their parents about the cabin, but my oldest uncle thought it would be a better idea to check it out first. On our reservation, the only thing you had to fear were possible mountain lions at night, so they weren't all that worried about some asshole trying to jump them. When they got to the cabin, it looked even shittier than up on the hill. The entire thing was clearly made out of garbage wood from a construction site. They thought about going in, but my youngest uncle noticed something dangling on a tree behind the cabin. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a crudely made dream catcher made out of twigs and wound up leaves. I don't know about other tribes, but this was the symbol of a curse in my tribe, so my grandmother and uncles immediately ran home to tell their parents about everything. Apparently, from what they told me, their parents were those stereotypical wise old Indians that never seemed to leave a calm emotional state. But when they told them about the cabin and dream catcher, they started freaking out and decided to round up their siblings and other family living nearby to investigate. The kids were told to stay home after giving them a description of where it all was. Unfortunately, it was already dark by the time my grandmother and uncles got home to tell their parents, so it was too dark to find it again. They decided to call it a night and look for it in the morning. I guess my grandmother was freaked out and didn't sleep. It was about 3 or 4 a.m. when one of my uncles told her that they were going to go look for the cabin again. My grandmother immediately didn't want to go or to let them go, but my uncles assured her that everything was going to be fine because they were bringing guns. She didn't want to go, but she decided to anyway because she knew they were going to go with or without her, so she didn't want to feel responsible if something happened to them. They ventured out into the darkness with heavy-duty flashlights and guns. My uncles felt invincible, but my grandmother was scared shitless. They eventually found the cabin again, but the faint cries were gone. At first they were relieved because they figured it was a deer or rabbit during the day that wandered off, and that they were scared for nothing, until they checked to see if the dream catcher was still there and found it on the ground in pieces. This meant that a great evil, the curse, was released. They were all traditionalists, so they didn't even pretend they didn't believe the curse wasn't real. They were all about to book it home, until my oldest uncle, again, suggested going into the cabin. He figured that whoever built it was in there and he was going to kill him. Yes, he was ready to kill a man for that. He even told me himself. So they, reluctantly, went in guns drawn, and they found nothing. It was a simple cabin with one of those wooden spools as a table and a rickety old chair next to it. They were about to leave until they heard the faint crying again. Obviously, they were sufficiently freaked out, but what scared them the most is where they were hearing it from. It wasn't outside. It was inside, under the floorboards. Everyone was frozen trying to figure out how that was even possible. Until one of my uncles pointed out that there could have been some kind of basement under the spool. Immediately, my grandmother said no and told them they had to leave. Of course, they didn't, and my oldest uncle went over to the spool and pushed it across the room. And they were right. There was a rotten-looking pallet over dirt stairs that led underground. Oldest uncle figured that it couldn't be that deep or that big, so he took the pallet off and got ready to go down. He always acted big and brave. He always seemed like it, but he really didn't want to go down. Luckily, he didn't have to. Right as he was about to take a step down, there was a loud crash at the door of the cabin that sent it flying open. They all raised their guns and aimed them at the door. I used to tell my grandmother that it was probably just the wind, but she always assured me that it was a strangely still night. They all stood aiming at the door for a good couple minutes when the crying became almost deafening loud and was emanating from all directions.
Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What's the scariest or most disturbing urban legend you heard?
When I was in a group home, we had these metal rooms called IMHF or something like that. I forgot what it stood for, but if you ever started to act up, you were thrown in there. Actually making us kids understand what we did wrong was above the staff's pay grade. These metal rooms were the one fix to every bad thing we did above backtalking. Due to me being autistic, you can imagine that I was put in this metal room a lot. I don't know how long this local tale inside the home has gone around. It may have been the week I got there or for many years. I've known kids who have been there far longer than me. Lily Red was a kid just like any of us, but was the most rotten and just overall cartoon levels of evil. After stabbing 2 staff with a knife, she snuck in. Most likely from school, as for some reason we went to public schooling instead of a school program at the home. She was to be detained and transferred to a mental hospital, but since none of the staff at the time had the proper training to do so, she was locked in the metal room. Hours went by, then days, then a whole week. Despite being fed and just about everything needed to stay alive, she passed away on the 7th day. Throughout all this time in the metal room, she never spoke a word. Although a pretty tame ghost story, as kids it scared the living shit out of us. So much so we would never say Red Lily, instead saying Maroon Rose as a funky alternate version of her name to not summon her. We believed if we somehow awoke her spirit, she would come after either one of us, or maybe even all. Isolation today, or even hours, has a huge effect on your mental state. Thus, some of us would see her through breakdowns or other mental quirks. Imagine living in total stress, trying not to be put in the metal room and end up there anyway. A powerful magnet locks the door and you can't do anything to open it. Nothing but your reflections. And then your reflections stop becoming you.
My dad's side of the family are old-school, rugged hunter types, similar to the folk in the original film Red Dawn. They live on and own a large portion of a mountainside in the Catskills. Around 10 to 15 second cousins who live up there, with their parents too. Their houses line the road all the way up, and the land around the houses are mostly theirs as well, so it's very secluded once on their dirt road. They own all the houses at the top except for one, which sits between 2 of my cousins' houses, near the top, separated by only a small border of trees and a crude rock wall, about 50 feet away from the house on each side. The house sits at the end of a curved ascending driveway, on a little grassy knoll, a small, single level, not counting basement. Creepy old cabin. Maple and oak trees are cast behind it like a curtain, as the mountain continues upward on a sharp, rocky incline. The largest tree overhangs the property, and from the tree hangs a worn-down old tire swing. The house can be seen clearly from the main road, at the start of the driveway. In fact, it's positioned in a way that almost feels as if it's actually watching over the driveway, like it's staring at you when you look in its direction. I don't know who lives there. I've never seen anyone enter or leave it. I've never seen a car there. I've never even seen a light on in a window. As far as I know, it's completely abandoned. What I do know is that there is a myth surrounding it. When me and my cousins were kids, our parents pulled us to the side and told us to never go on that property. And when we protested because, we'll say, come on, it had a damn tire swing, they warned us again and said, the mole men live there. When we asked them what that means, we were told that there were little men that lived in the house and in the holes on the mountainside behind it. Men no bigger than the size of your hand. They live in the ground and underneath the house, as their tunnels connect to their dark basement where they live. We were told that these masculine creatures don't tolerate trespassing, and that if they were to catch trespassers, and they have, they attack. with speed, faster than a rabbit, and teeth far sharper than a normal human's, biting at their ankles and legs of their prey, climbing them and tearing at their flesh, dragging whoever dare trespass on their land either whole or in pieces down into their holes, never to be seen again. Suffice to say, we never went on that property apart from one day in the fall to play on the swing. We looked in the windows out of curiosity and saw that the inside was a normal room, but old, as if someone hadn't updated it in 50 years. Everything was covered in dust, but filled with stuff, like an old wooden table and silverware, as if someone had been living there but suddenly disappeared. While swinging on the tire, we eventually heard the leaves rustling in the woods behind us and promptly ran, never looking back. Kinda looked like pick-related. Tried my best to draw the layout. Long story short, this shit scared the shit out of me for a while, and I'll always remember it. We also have a 100-year-old woman who lives in the woods and lives off the land like an animal. She comes out of the woods and visits us once a year with deer, but that's for another story.
I need to target something first.
So there is some kind of cursed place in the city I live in. Some bad stuff happened near that place. A kid got hit by the old train there and survived. His nervous system was shit after that. Couldn't walk and was making noises and screaming all the time. Pretty close to that place, a house exploded. Well, a butane cylinder exploded, killing an old lady and her son. There was a traveling circus once and they showed animals and stuff. A guy tried to pet a tiger and got his arm bitten so bad that they had to remove it. A serial killer killed a married couple with a gun in that place. There is no legend of that place, nor stories or paranormal explanation to why bad stuff happens there from time to time. It just happens.
Pittsburgh has a few based purely on speculation, but one tale is truly unique and fascinating. This one is known as the Green Man. Born in 1918, a bright young boy, barely 8 years old, accepted a dare that would alter his life forever. Raymond Robinson and his friends would frequent the Morado Bridge to get to a popular swimming hole. Unbeknownst to them, the bridge was incredibly dangerous as it had live cable wires that allowed trolleys to cross at will. A child his same age died a year earlier climbing the pole. Robinson's friends spied a bird's nest atop a tree close to one of these very poles. Not one to back down from a challenge, Raymond climbed without hesitation. He touched the exposed wire, nearly reaching the top, and it sent 22,000 volts through his body. His right side was severely burned, and his eyes, nose, left ear, and most of his face was burned off. His friends called the police, and he was rushed to a nearby hospital in Beaver Falls. He was not expected to live past a year, but defied doctors' expectations. His facial features were all but gone, and he lost his left arm, and it was amputated. Regardless of the unfortunate event, Raymond kept up high spirits, hoping to return to his old life. Upon returning home, he learned of the cruelty of his fellow peers. Because he was blinded, could not comprehend the extent of his injuries. The children in his neighborhood were terrified of his appearance, and he was shunned. He spent the next many years inside doing brain teasers and hiking in the woods in his backyard, and making handmade wares to sell for his family's finances. Decades later, he began taking long hikes on the highway that ran close to his home. With one foot on the pavement and a walking stick held in his one remaining arm, he proceeded to go on long journeys up and down the freeway. It did not take long for rumors to spread of a faceless figure emerging from the darkness, frightening passerbys. As interest peaked, many stopped to talk to him, often taking sympathy to plight. He began to capitalize on the encounters, asking for beer or cigarettes in exchange for a conversation or story which he told exceptionally well. Occasionally, there would be thrill seekers and hecklers who would harass him and give him cigarettes laced with drugs. Despite this, Raymond was never deterred and kept his walks up for many years to come. Eventually, he allowed his picture to be taken for a price. He became known in the surrounding areas as the Green Man for undetermined reasons. Some say he often wore green shorts during the summer. Others say it was a jacket. Others argue it was his skin, which had a green tint from the burns, which did not completely heal properly. During the late 50s and early 60s, his popularity was near legend in the area.
I need to get closer.
As the years passed by, the next generation became bolder and would sometimes take Raymond on excursions to nearby Pittsburgh to bars and to astonish friends. Other times, young men would take their dates to see him in the hopes they would cling closer to him. It is not known what exactly transpired, but in 1982, Raymond was placed in the care of a nursing home. One rumor states that he was driven to a tunnel at least 50 miles from his home and beaten severely by teenagers, after which he spent the remainder of his life in a nursing home. Legend holds that his ghost still haunts this tunnel, waiting for bullies or hecklers to return to scare them off. It is said that if his ghost appears, he will touch your car, sending shockwaves through it. Cars often stall and inexplicably die in this tunnel as well. The tunnel was eventually filled with salt to deny people entrance and closed.
My nowhere village in Flanders was home to a wealthy monastery during the Middle Ages, Pick-related, before Calvinists burnt it down in the 16th century. According to many elderly people I spoke to in my youth, it was common knowledge that the monks dug a tunnel system throughout the centuries to connect the many buildings they owned in the surrounding villages. These old people could even point to exact addresses where the tunnels surfaced, and I was told many of these houses are haunted. Stuff like footsteps, hearing hushed voices, and seeing candlelight illuminate walls. In the 19th, early 20th century, most of the tunnel entrances were walled off to keep the ghosts out, and no serious archaeological research has ever been carried out, save for a shallow and hasty dig at the old monastery's site in the 70s, before a residential area was built on top of it. Some people tried to go into the tunnels in search of a large treasure that was supposedly hidden there by the monks at the outbreak of the Reformation Wars, but they were either scared away not far into the tunnel, blocked by heavy metal doors, or simply disappeared into the darkness. Probably death by hypoxia from venturing into an underground tunnel closed off for centuries. By now, practically all of these haunted houses have been demolished to make way for new housing, and those elderly people from my youth have since long passed away. I fear the mystery of these haunted tunnels and a possible monastic treasure might never get cleared up.
This one's from my hometown, Molly's grave. The witch was chopped to pieces. Her butchered body parts were buried in separate graves, scattered through the wooded countryside. But beneath the shallow soil, the pieces are moving. Year by year, inch by inch, they draw closer together, crawling, wriggling, struggling to reassemble into the living corpse of Molly Crenshaw. From one generation to the next, teenagers throughout St. Charles County have passed down this homegrown urban legend about a supposed witch who died a century ago, but still haunts the local forests. The tale varies depending on the storyteller. According to most versions, Molly Crenshaw was a freed Jamaican slave who lived in western St. Charles County during the late 19th century. A voodoo practitioner, Molly was often called upon to dispense spells and potions for local townsfolk. One year, an unusually harsh winter decimated local crops. Villagers blamed Molly and her evil witchcraft. Pitchforks raised, they descended on her modest home. Molly defiantly confronted them, placing a curse on anyone who touched her. Unflinching, the mob attacked and killed her. Some say they cut her in half. Others say she was drawn and quartered. But every version of the tale ends with the townspeople burying the dismembered portions in separate graves.
Whoa, definitely sounds like something some ignorant and scared townsfolk would do in a panicked situation. It reminds me of a similar legend of two lovers killed by a roadside in my town. It is said that once they died by provenience, they were buried next to each other with only two rocks as gravestones. Each year, the stones leaned closer and closer to each other in a desperate attempt for the lovers to reconnect. They say if the stones ever touch, the world will end.
Growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, most scares here involved muggings and murders. But there is one place of historical significance that serves as a breeding ground for many paranormal stories. Fort McHenry, a military base built on a peninsula at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay during the late 1700s. Fort McHenry has seen a lot of action over the past couple centuries. The most well-known event being the Battle of Baltimore during the War of 1812, a 24-hour-long holdout against the British Royal Navy after they had just captured Washington, D.C., and practically burned it to the ground. Our national anthem was written about this battle by a man who had watched it unfold before his very eyes, on top of being the location of one of the most pivotal battles to ever take place on American soil. Fort McHenry has also served brief stints throughout history as a hospital and a prison. You would hear stories all the time about ghost sightings and strange occurrences over there. Apparitions of 19th century soldiers patrolling along the fort's raised walls, grieving, twisted spirits of those who died in confinement or were executed within the fort's walls, sounds of distant artillery, and sudden wafts of sulfuric odor. I remember one story in particular about a hostile spirit that would frequent the women's restroom and would throw shit at people who had their backs turned. The National Park Service that looks over the place even took advantage of these stories by offering ghost tours at some point, parading people around the fort at night, telling the most popular ghost stories. I've been to Fort McHenry multiple times during the day, and I can't corroborate any of these stories myself, but that's usually how these things go.
South America Anon here. My family all live in small rural areas, so I've heard a ton of scary shit whenever I went to visit. I'll write down the ones I remember for now, some of which I posted before. Uncle's Town. When he was a kid, there was this guy who apparently went crazy one day, running all over town like he was trying to escape from something before going back home and dying of a reported heart attack. After that, his wife would dress in black and sit outside the entire day without saying a word until nightfall, where she would go back inside and neighbors would hear crying. It got so creepy people avoided going near that street, which was easy because it was the last house in a dead end. After a few months, she stopped leaving the house altogether and the crying moaning got louder, as well as sounds of things falling. Nobody really wanted to call the police for noise complaints to let the poor widow grieve in peace, even if it meant her thrashing the house every night. One night it got really bad, like she was tearing the place down at 2 a.m., and a neighbor called the cops over it. It was so bad, apparently even people from the other street went over to check what was going on. After no response, they decided to bust the door down and the noise immediately stopped. Dead silence. First floor was perfectly intact, nothing broken or out of place, very clean too. Same for the second floor. They head into the woman's room, and it's also perfectly intact, but she's dead. Just laying on the bed with her hands on her body like in a coffin, zero wounds or signs of starvation or dehydration or anything else. Later, the autopsy didn't find anything wrong with her. No heart attack, diseases, stroke, poison, nothing. And that she had been dead for at least 2 weeks. Everyone in that dead-end street moved away because they said they could still hear it some nights, and it's been abandoned ever since. This one's a bit hazy, so it took me a while to remember and find an appropriate pick. Sorry. Aunt's Town, other side of the family, not that uncle's wife. Absolutely shitty poor town with nothing going on. When she was a teenager, there was this crazy guy, probably schizophrenic, who had inherited this huge house in a farm from his parents, and he hated anyone talking to him other than the shops he bought food from. One day he shows up with this woman no one in town knew. Small town, everyone knows each other, so this stands out. He introduced her to the butcher and bought like twice the amount of meat he usually did. My aunt's family lived close to the butcher, and her grandma said the woman was 100% a witch because, I can tell from looking at her, she's got bad spirits all around her. Some days later, this woman went around introducing herself to the people in town, but Aunt's grandma, as well as her friends, church grandmas, refused to open the door at all. She said she doesn't know how many times the woman kept going to their houses and knocking over and over, even left a note saying she just wanted to talk, which Aunt's grandma burnt immediately, as well as dousing the front door in holy water every day. Days later, they find the guy's head sitting on a bench in the middle of the town square, way skinnier than the last time anyone's seen him, and police rushes to the farm, outside of town like 30-minute drive, only to find all the crops withered, all the chickens and roosters are dead. The 2 horses had their heads cut off, and the inside of the house smelled strongly like sulfur. All the cops ran out and didn't investigate further. The area was blocked off, and even priests refused to go there. My aunt heard the rest of his body parts would sporadically show up in different spots, smelling like sulfur, and every time the priest would purify the area for hours, but she doesn't remember seeing that. Personal experiences time. Uncle's town again. There's this long road leading into the town that's got nothing but sand to the sides, and apparently some gang used to bury the bodies there in the middle of the night, since it's too much land to check. Usual ghost stories about how their spirits would stand in the road asking people for help, but he didn't really believe it. I only heard about this much later, and it's not quite right. Several times when we were heading there, I could swear I saw people sitting off to the side of the road. I never thought about it as a kid, but after hearing that, it spooked the shit out of me. Town my mom was in for college. Nice place, but for some reason all the buses would only go to this road until 9 p.m. The Gov statement was that the crime level was high and it would be dangerous for drivers and passengers to be there that late, but every single bus driver she asked about said it was bullshit. They claimed one part of the road was cursed, and driving there at night would 100% lead to an accident, since that's when the ghosts are out. Some mentioned knowing older drivers that disregarded it, and in a matter of minutes they lose control of their body and steer the bus towards the same wall. It's not a driving mistake. The road is very lit up. They just instinctively turn to slam it into the same wall every time. There's a ton of ghost stories and haunt theories about what the hell is up with that, since it never happens in the morning or afternoon, just at night. Even the people who live there don't know what's up with it. They avoid driving there too. They changed it to being a brick road, put triple the amount of street lights, and everyone who drives there is compelled to ram the car against the wall at night without fail. We stayed there like 4 years ago, and that law was still in place, and everyone still didn't have any answer, other than some tourist ignored it and died the same way. I just got back from dinner and just asked my mom if she remembered any other urban legends, and she mentioned there's a tree in her hometown where a moderately famous author from like 1920 or something would go to for inspiration, and he hung himself on a branch of it after it got published. It's referred to as the Devil's Tree, where it'll give you something in exchange for your life. 2 other people also hung themselves there on different branches after being successful. One local singer who had 2 hit songs in the 70s, and some local actress who had a big breakout after starring in a famous soap opera in the 90s. It's a huge old tree and illegal to take it down, so they just use it as a spooky tourist spot now.
Be me, live in a ghetto near a park. 5 years ago, a girl and her boyfriend murdered the boyfriend's ex in the park, stabbed, beat, and burned alive in the creek that runs through the park. All over the news. Anyways, people are pretty freaked out by the creek now. Kids in the neighborhood keep saying that there's a woman in the creek who tells them she's hurt and to go get help. When they come back with someone, the woman is gone, no trace. Kids make an urban legend, say that if you go to the park at midnight and sit by a creek, the woman will appear and scare you. Bored, about 3 years after the murder, drinking with friends one night at a park. Decide to go to the creek and hang around. Ghosts aren't real. Suddenly, all of us feel sick and heavy, hard to stand, feel dizzy. We stumble back up thinking maybe a gas leak or some poison in the air, who knows? Hear a very loud scream come from the creek once we're above. Run and look down into the creek. Shine phone flashlights. Nothing. Shit bricks collectively, run home. Looking back on it now, probably a crackhead who screamed that night, but spooky nonetheless. Also, pretty cool to think that urban legends are still being made. It's a human trait to make ghost stories, I guess.
Alright, so here's a local legend called the Devil's Church from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Varies from early 1900s to the 1960s. People from this tiny community on the outskirts of Cruces go to this tiny church every Sunday. One Sunday, people are trying to go to church, but the doors are locked so no one can get in. Everyone's like, WTF. They see shadows moving inside, but the windows aren't big enough to really tell what's going on inside. Eventually, the Cruces police show up and open the doors. The shadows that were moving are actually the pastor who hung himself. Swinging side to side, everyone flips a shit. They find sacrificed animals in the church basement. A letter to Satan where the pastor handed his soul over. Pentagram painted in blood on the altar. Cuts on dead pastor's fingertips indicate that's his blood. Church is temporarily closed but reopens a few months later with a new pastor. During church service, the lights go out unexpectedly. Bibles fly out of bookshelves hitting people. People hear an heroed pastor's voice during service. Eventually, the church shuts down. People say at night you can see the same shadows of his swinging hung corpse through windows. You can hear voices from outside and pounding on the basement doors. General feeling of unwelcomeness and unease the closer you approach the church. I've personally been to the church at night, and that place is pretty eerie, but I didn't get close enough to look through the windows. People have said that a couple of years ago some local teens broke in, and one committed self-termination some days after because he kept having visions of the church where he was the pastor sacrificing the animals and could hear Satan's voice. One went insane and has been in the Mesilla Valley Hospital, local loony bin, ever since. One apparently ran away the same night after breaking in and has never been seen since. One was possessed and successfully exorcised just a few miles across the border in Mexico but stayed there.
Flagstaff, Arizona. Incredibly paranormal state, very paranormal town. Circa 1890s. Railroad construction going wild, bringing in tons of cash to boom towns popping up along the way. Chinese immigrants to the U.S. make up a good chunk of the workforce. As it's the most available job and nobody else wants to hire them, settlers do not want these guys there. Constantly harassing the Chinese citizens, racially motivated hate crimes, the whole thing. The entire city burns down in 1905, mostly because brainlets had made everything out of dry northern Arizona wood. And lightning tends to do that. Guess who they blame for this? The Chinese. People start getting lynched, chased down, cast off. Drastic measures have to be taken. Chinese working as servants have the idea that all of them should just live in the service tunnels that run beneath town. These tunnels let the servants travel all around town underground. They'd be staying out of the settlers' way, but also able to still work the railroads and lumber industries for money. Thousands of Chinese citizens literally move into the ground and begin living in these tunnels, which go on for miles. Always adding more, making secret passageways in case they were blamed for something again and needed to hide. Eventually, they become basically catacombs where they smoke opium, gamble, do all kinds of shit in peace. People even buried down there Paris style. I have been in these tunnels, and let me tell you, these things are creepy. Doors that lead to who knows where are still locked. Bizarre messages written on walls, stairways that go down even further to places. It's all there.
So the scariest one I remember was probably the Ant-Man. I won't say where I'm from because it's not important, and I come on 4chan to be anonymous. Years ago, a mad scientist lives on the outskirts of town near the woods, because obviously there's a mad scientist. He does all these weird experiments involving lots of animals, but mainly with ants. The story went that nobody really knew where his house was, but sometimes you'd feel bites on your feet, look down and see yourself getting swarmed by ants. That's how you knew you were getting close. Ants were supposed to get bigger and bigger the closer you got. Some stories even say that there would be ants near the house the size of rats. One story says a woman heard her baby crying one night and went into the room to find these rat-sized ants trying to drag her baby away. My favorite one was about a giant ant he made that lives underground. Whenever we'd see birds flying away from something in the woods, my brother would tell me it was the giant ant walking around. Anyway, one day some kids go looking for his house and actually find it. It looks abandoned, but it's definitely his cause. It's filled with old lab equipment. As they make their way around, they eventually find a bedroom. There's a bed covered in ants with somebody sleeping under it. One boy goes to pull back the sheets to see if it's the scientist, pulls back the blanket, and sees a man's body with a giant black ant's head. Body is humanoid, but with a type of carapace instead of skin. Black and hard, like armor, with little spiky claws for fingers. Boys freak out and run home. Tell parents, but nobody believes them. They each go to bed that night, but one by one, they wake up because they can feel things crawling over their bodies. They rip off their blankets to see themselves covered in millions of ants. They look up just in time to see the silhouette of a giant ant with a human body and huge glistening pincers crawling on their ceiling before it skitters down the wall and attacks them. This last part was normally accompanied by the storyteller jumping and grabbing one of us to see if we would scream.
I lived in a town in Ireland called Tipperary. When I lived there, I kept hearing about a guy called Thomas. People told me he was a serial Christian and a Minecraft YouTuber. I never saw him, neither any one of my friends, but one time during Halloween we had a party out in Bonsha. We all got really drunk and ditched. We decided that we should check out this house that was abandoned for a couple of years, so we go into the place and it a shithole. We checked the whole house, but nothing was there, but the attic was open, so being drunk and everyone else was a wuss. I decided to go up. After my friend boosted me up, I grabbed his phone to use as a flashlight, and I fucking swear the first thing I see is a guy's face staring right at me. He was bald, clean-shaven, and looked like shit. Anyway, we ran away, and the only person we could think of who would live there was Tomas. We called the cops afterwards, but no one was there. Scared the shit out of me.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.
In the 1950s, a weapon was invented that has become more powerful than America's deadliest weapons of mass destruction. It is the weapon of mass deception, and it is right in our own living rooms. The hypnotizing world of picture television brings us the news of the world through two central news agencies called Reuters and the Associated Press. The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s, which later bought the Associated Press and made the Rothschild family owners of the world's largest central news services. To the present day, the world depends on these Rothschild-owned central news services as their main source of news and information. In his book called Who Owns the TV Networks, author Eustace Mullins claims that the major TV networks, radio stations, newspapers, and publishing empires are controlled by the Rothschild, Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan money cartels through their corporate conglomerates. The bankster-owned media conglomerates include weapons manufacturers, General Electric and Westinghouse, which profit from promoting wars. Control over the internet, publishing, recording, and top cable companies can be traced back to the same Big Five media empires: General Electric, Time Warner, Viacom, Disney, and News Corp. These media monopolies are owned directly or indirectly by the Rothschild, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Oppenheimer Brotherhood. Yes, there are now more stations and more media voices, but they're all coming from the same ventriloquist. Every TV show needs corporate sponsors, and corporate sponsors sponsor pro-business, pro-government programming, and journalists who support the agenda of the Big Five media owners. While 2/3 of the world goes hungry, these banksters offer gazillion-dollar sponsorships to sports athletes to play with their balls. Why? Because they keep the masses distracted from the important issues. The media and banking monopolists now have the power to make or break political leaders around the globe. Why haven't the networks made a TV movie of the week about how the Bush family made their family fortune? The movie could be called The Awful Truth, starring George W.'s great-grandfather, Samuel P. Bush, whose Buckeye Steel Castings Company supplies parts for Edward Harriman's railroads, who in turn provides rail shipments for John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, who in turn gets monopoly financing from the Rothschilds. The movie could be made into a TV series starring Samuel's son, Prescott Bush, as the managing director of a Nazi steel manufacturing plant in Poland called Silesian Consolidated Steel. In Episode 1, Prescott Bush forwards American financing to his German partner Fritz Thyssen through the Union Banking Corporation in New York. Fritz Thyssen arranges a contract with Nazi Germany's IG Farben Company. Episode 2 shows Skull and Bonesman Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman getting caught under Trading with Your Enemy Act as the U.S. government moves in and seizes all of their shares in Union Banking Corporation. In Episode 3, Prescott's son, the first George Bush, is director of the CIA. George puts drug king Manuel Noriega on the CIA payroll, allowing thousands of tons of cocaine to hit the streets of America via the Panama Canal. In Episode 4, George's son, the second George Bush, becomes partners with Osama bin Laden's older brother, Salem bin Laden, in a Texas oil company called Arbuso Energy. Episode 5 introduces George W. Shady, younger brother, Neil Bush, ripping off the elderly in the Silverado savings and loan scandal that cost U.S. taxpayers $1.3 billion. In Episode 6, the Florida election is fixed by George W.'s older brother, Jeb Bush, who puts brother George into the top job at the White House, which brings us back to Auschwitz, and the concluding episode with George W. Bush visiting the slave labor camp where his grandfather helped build the Bush family fortune. The sights are sobering reminders of the power of evil and the need for people to resist evil. Ladies and gentlemen, as a follow-up to the TV series, an award show could celebrate the 20-year friendship of the Bush and bin Laden families and their shared investment in the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group is one of America's largest weapons contractors. For the Bush and bin Laden families, war means profits, big profits. Although the media creates the illusion of freedom of the press,